Yeah, I guess it's been a while since the last episode. And yeah, that's probably going to be how it's going to be. Um, I think this is kind of like a different sort of show. It's not like going to be a weekly thing now that I'm doing it and feeling how much time it takes. For example, I wrote up literally like 20 pages for this script for today. So we'll see how long that goes. Hopefully, it won't be 3.5 hours like the last one. I just, obviously not everyone can sit through that or whatever, but I did try to, kind of split it up so people can choose what they want to hear and what they want to listen to. But the reason I do it like that is because I am somewhat of a completionist. I want to make sure I say everything that I need to say about something, bring in all the facts, bring in all the stuff, so that this is kind of like, I guess, how my mind works. It has to have every single piece of information. Kant's manifold of to get as close to the thing in itself as possible. Just all the manifolds of information and data. So, yeah, and I think I put out a pretty good product, if I say so myself, in terms of that. So that's how it's going to be. And another bit of news that's it's kind of funny. I'm going to be back on KTSC. So since that's a different kind of show, I feel like I can do both. That's not too much of more of a time commitment as this, because somebody already does the editing and the choosing of the topics and all that stuff for me. I just kind of have to, be there and give my opinions and, be knowledgeable, which I think I do a good job of being. But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we'll see how that goes. You'll see me there basically probably next Wednesday, or I don't know when this is coming out, but like, yeah, probably in like 4 or 5 days. So you can catch me at KTSC. I'll put a link to KTSC in the description if you want to follow me there again. But if you want to just follow me here, that's all fine and good as well. So yeah, and what else do I want to say? Nothing else. I think yeah, I've been pretty busy over the past few weeks. I'm still doing the research for the big project. Hopefully gonna write some scripts for that soon. At least for the first few episodes, since I've researched all that stuff for the past half a year, year and a half. It's pretty exhausting, but I'm kind of doing it, and keeping up with all my stuff that I've been working on. Just been kind of like doing a lot of stuff nonstop. I can't really like talk about a lot of it right now, but suffice to say, I'm busy. So that's the reason you're not getting weekly 3.5 hour dissertations on things. But today, yeah, let's get into it. All right. So today I actually kind of want to talk about Hollywood. And I know that, with Snow White, especially in the news right now, there's a lot of debate on whether or not Snow White, is bombing because of Rachel Zegler, its lead actress, who's been very vocal about political stuff, or if it's just simply due to the fact that the movie sucks. And I think, it's a little bit of column A, but it's a lot more of column B. And there's a Snow White IP, like, sorry, that's not a thing. I mean, like, when they were starting to do their live action movies, they knew which IP was the most profitable, and they went with those first, right? So now they're like starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and they put out a movie that nobody really wanted to see. I guess like maybe the parents who didn't know any better and just kind of like wanted to take their kids to a movie and take a break for the night might have been horrified to see what they saw. But for the most part, I've read some reviews, and it's just kind of like, yeah, the movie is terrible. So, and ironically enough, apparently the same critics say that even the ones that hate her say that she's the best part of the movie. But yeah, I mean, like, there probably was some sort of effect. I'm not going to say there was like zero, but I don't think it was like the bulk of why it failed. And yeah, I guess that's why I'm doing this episode, to talk about the industry, to tell you the economics, to teach you how this whole propaganda, how the matrix works, you know. All right, so let me just kind of like go through some of the stuff. So yeah, I mean, in 2024, the full year box office domestic receipts for Hollywood films was around 8.6 billion. And that was a slight decrease from 2023, which was the first full year of non-COVID affected theater viewing. So 2023, I mean, there was, you know, it was mostly gone by 2022, but there was still some COVID stuff going on. So this is more of like the first accurate post-COVID year was 2023, and that was around 8.9 billion. So it was a slight decrease from 2023. But in 2018, that was when Hollywood box office peaked at 11.9 billion. That was the year of, I think it was Endgame was that year. I forgot. There was probably other kind of Marvel and Disney films that like crushed at the box office that year too, and that's how you got 11.9 billion. But apparently this year, you know, it looks like it's even worse than, you know, last year. So we're I don't know, Disney is looking pretty in dire straits right now, because Captain America flopped. That was a huge bomb. You know, like I said, Snow White looks like it's gonna flop, and I think Thunderbolts is definitely going to flop. Like, no one's gonna fucking watch that. And even Fantastic Four. I'm not even like, I grew up with Fantastic Four. I read those movies. I mean, I read those comic books a lot, and I was pretty obsessed with the movie, or with the fucking team, or with the comics. But yeah, I'm not even excited for that movie. And that was a movie I really wanted. Like, when the MCU really started and like was picking up steam, I was like, oh, I can't wait for the Fantastic Four. Now it's just kind of like, oh god, I don't want to see how they mess this up yet a third time, like with Josh Trank's disaster. I didn't even watch that, actually, so maybe I can't speak on that. But that first one, oh god. And now they're gonna just, it's gonna be like woke garbage or nonsense now, and it's just, yeah, whatever. But yeah, so that's the movie business. And peak TV was a era that began 25 years ago. It's kind of known as the golden age of television. So like back when I think The Sopranos came out on HBO, that started like the high quality television show. And by 2022, we had 600 English language scripted series, 600 shows on TV in 2022. So you can see, like, I don't know what the numbers were back in 1999 when The Sopranos came out, I think. But it was not 600. It was probably like 200, maybe like 150 to 200. So clearly people were like, oh, the success of The Sopranos and like, shows like The Wire and et cetera, they piled into TV. And but by 2024, end of 2024, those shows were cut to around 450 to 500. So we can almost see kind of like this woke apocalypse happening right now in the past couple of years. But I think it's going to be even worse in the coming years. I don't think there is going to be any sort of improvement. I know that I've heard through the grapevine that some writers and people are waiting it out, right? The business is gonna pick back up sometime, so it's just like it's just a temporary setback. They've got cushy, I guess, like bag from their previous jobs. They can kind of like weather the storm a bit, maybe for a year or two. But I think they are in for a rude surprise, because I don't think the industry will recover from this, and will continue to decline. Because those WGA strikes, they only worsened the divide, right? Because they just secured deals for the top level talent, your your Shonda Rhimes, your, Vince Gilligan's, your, like the big showrunners that kind of dominate Hollywood now. WGA just worked for those guys. They didn't care about the fucking, rank and file, the people who write like, one-liners or whatever, or grab coffee or whatever. You guys are all fucked. Sorry to say. But yeah, they got their money. But yeah, so as the studios crumble, big tech is, these sharks are circling the waters, right? They're fucking waiting for these companies to just die, right? Like for the longest time, for example, Marvel wanted to buy, or Disney wanted to buy Spider-Man from Sony, right? But they couldn't, like, because Sony wanted to keep making them. Now I feel like they wouldn't even want to buy Spider-Man from Sony, because it's so like fucked up from what Amy Pascal and Sony have done to it, that they're just kind of like, oh god, this is terrible. It's all this shit is happening right now, and so the temptation for most people is to point at COVID and be like, oh, COVID is the reason why, and COVID is, if there was never COVID, everything would have been fine, and movies would still be popular, and the train would still be running. But while COVID did have an impact on films and the movie business, I'm not going to say that it didn't. I think that Hollywood's decline was, already happening. I was researching this stuff back in 2019, and already I was just kind of like, Hollywood's fucked. And that's most of the reason I pivoted out. Even before the pandemic, I was, trying to study for business school or do something else with my life, right? As I said in the first episode. But when I saw the numbers, when I saw the figures, when I saw the trends, I was like, yeah, this is not going well. So, but yeah, so like I said, I think this has been a long time coming, and I've been in the entertainment industry since I moved here in 2012 to Los Angeles. So, I go over, how Asian males are, not treated well in Hollywood. I think that's an understatement, but I'll just leave it at that. But because of that, we have to work, especially on the writing side, not as much, because you don't see our faces, right? Like you can have like an Alan Yang that can succeed in the writing side. And be kind of like very influential. But on the acting side, because they can see your face and because you're like that, it's like fucking an uphill climb to get into the industry. And so, I always make the joke that being an Asian male in Hollywood is like trying to play the game of Oregon Trail as a farmer. You had multiple, like, when you played Oregon Trail, I don't know, for you younger folk out there, you had like 4 options, and like one was like the banker, you got the most money or something. One was like the worker. I don't even fucking know what the middle 2 were, but the bottom one was the farmer, and you had to like get no money, and you were going to Oregon, and this is a Great Depression, so you're gonna fucking die most of the time. So you know what I mean? But because it is so difficult for Asian men, it's the whole kind of like, whatever doesn't kill you make you stronger, kind of like Nietzschean concept of like, because it's so difficult, Asian men who are really trying to get in, like, figure out like all the little things, all the little details of the industry. Like, you got to research everything, you got to figure out what's going on, and that's kind of like what some of my friends and I have been doing since we got here. So that's kind of like why I feel like I have a unique perspective of the industry, because like I feel like not only have I researched it, I've been in it, and I kind of understand how it all works. And so around that time in 2019, when I was on my way out, this is kind of why I was way out. I was working for kind of like a small production startup that was trying to create low budget genre films for non-white characters. We saw the success of Get Out. It was a movie that was made in 2017. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. But it was the reason we were looking at it, it was because it was a genre film, meaning it was a horror film, right? It was very low budget. I think it was like $5 to $10 million or whatever. And, it hit massive success in the box office. And the actor, I think the black actor, I forgot what his name is, but I don't think he was like a very well-known actor. So that was a big thing my boss kind of like honed in on. It was like, oh, you don't need actually like big name talent to sell genre films, because nobody fucking cares. Like if like, Sylvester Stallone is in a horror film, like you don't go to the horror film to watch like crazy acting. So like his way was kind of like trying to reverse engineer that model, be like, hey, if we can put diverse talent in this movie, in these cheap genre movies, we can, try to build in that direction. So that's kind of like the conceit of what we were trying to accomplish. So I was doing some research on trends in Gen Z and kind of trying to understand the Gen Z mindset in terms of what they consumed and how they consume media and what they liked and stuff like that. And I noticed that at our age, at the same age, Gen Z was like watching movies at 40% less rates than we were at the same age. And so I was like, oh man, that's huge, because, traditionally the biggest moviegoers are, I think they're like 18 to 24, because like you're in high school or college or whatever, you're just, going on dates and hanging out and trying to see the new thing and whatever. And so traditionally, yeah, like movies have been for the young. But now it was just kind of like, oh, they only go to like these Marvel films, like 4 to 5 films a year. We used to go to films around 9 to 10 films a year when we were around college age. Like I'm a millennial. I'm 41 right now. So that kind of tracks, I feel like. I might have gone a little less. Actually, I like to, probably just torrent shit instead of paying full price, like the cheapo Asian I am. But I think, yeah, it was 9 to 10 times, I think, for our cohort in the same age, and they were around 4 or 5. And, I was like, yeah, those are probably all either the big Disney, Star Wars, or the big, like, Marvel films and nothing else. And they probably spend like $0 on concession because like Gen Z kids are super poor, so, and that's like all the theater revenue. So like, or, a lot of the theater, revenue is from concessions. And so like, the movie business did not look very promising in 2019, even back then. And I was just kind of like, yeah, this is not a viable business operation. That's why by the end of the year, I was like, yeah, time to go to business school. Because, like not only that, like Gen Z's attention spans are super low. Like they don't even want to watch the whole movie. Sometimes they watch like, I don't know if you guys know, but they watch like these 10-minute like shortened versions of the movie where it's like, and then this happened, and then it shows like the scene that whatever, and then like there's a narrator that explains what happens in the next scene, and then it shows that scene, and then like it finishes. And my dad watches all those kinds of movies all the time, so maybe he's Gen Z too. He watches it in Korean, but he's been watching a lot of like westerns or whatever on YouTube since it's all free content. But sometimes he watches like the 10-minute version because he's like, I just want to know what happens. So yeah, I was just kind of like, oh man, they like, TikTok has destroyed their brains. That's destroyed their ADHD. They have no attention span whatsoever. So I was just kind of like, yeah, this is a dying business. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. I've been feeling a little bit of Scheudenfreude over the past few years, seeing Hollywood crash and burn, seeing that, because I'm a human. I'm a little vindictive. I felt like I put in very good products and they were not really acknowledged. And I was like, fuck this industry, and got what it deserved. So yeah, I do feel that Scheudenfreude, but I, I also see now, especially becoming communist, I see Hollywood as a propaganda arm of the United States. And so that's why I kind of want to go over, the entire industry to not only just like show why Hollywood is in decline, but the kind of power it had over people, and you know, kind of like how they worked in tandem with the American government, sometimes in terms of their goals of I guess keeping the people controlled, keeping the people in the matrix. Because like when I was younger, I thought I was immune to propaganda, right? Like I would watch TV commercials and be like, as a kid, I'd be like, well, I'm not gonna buy that. Like, so I'm not affected by this shit. It's mostly because I was a kid and I couldn't buy anything. But like I was just like thinking like, how can like, I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, why do people think that like just showing a product on TV will get people to buy it? And surprisingly, sometimes it does directly, but it's more, after watching Mad Men and stuff like that, I was like, oh yeah, this is very manipulative, and that's how they kind of like play with your sense of perception and whatever and whatnot. Because like on the other side, even though I was saying all that, right? I was I was a very quiet kid growing up, surprisingly, right? Like I'm kind of crazy now. But it was because I was recently diagnosed with mild autism spectrum disorder. You didn't notice, right? But no, I was very quiet and reserved because I was very, I was very nervous. I was very socially awkward. And when I was I think I was like in middle school oh yeah, I was in elementary school and I was going to go into middle school. And one of my best friend at the time, he was moving to a different town. So I was just going to the middle school by myself. And I felt like I had no friends. I was like, whatever. But then like over that summer, I had watched Jim Carrey's The Mask. And immediately I felt connected to that character. It felt like, almost electric. Like I just like started doing, impressions, in the parking lot outside. And even the reason I went to that movie was crazy because it was like my cousin who was taking me to it. And when we were visiting my cousin in Texas, and she was just kind of like, hey, you mind if I take the kids to a movie while you guys, do your adult chatting stuff? And they're like, oh, yeah. So, like, because my parents, they didn't take me to anything like a Jim Carrey movie. They took me to, like, fucking, those Disney movies maybe or whatever. I don't even know if we went to many of those Disney. They didn't really, like, take us out to anything, really. We didn't have cable TV. We didn't have anything except for, I guess I had my video games, but that was it. We just had basic network TV and the radio. That was our entertainment. So I'm watching this movie for the first time, and it's kind of like my first introduction to like live action comedy in America. And as I go into middle school, in my fifth grade, I'm noticing that everyone's talking about Ace Ventura. The same Jim Carrey's in that movie too, and I was just kind of like, oh, this guy is like kind of like a popular guy among like all these white kids. Maybe if I figure out what's so cool about him, I can integrate, So I think in 1995, right? I'm not sure. But basically I think it might have been the summer of fifth grade as well. Or no. So summer of fourth grade, I was going to the middle school, which was fifth grade, and then summer going to sixth grade. My family and we were going to a different movie altogether. Like I forgot what it was. It's probably some sort of boring family film. And as we're going up to line up to buy the tickets, I noticed Ace Ventura 2 is like on the top billing. And I'm like, as an 11-year-old kid, I'm like, hey guys, I'm gonna see you later. I'm going like the movie actually already started, like this 10 minutes in, but I'm just kind of like, hey guys, I'll see you later. I'm gonna watch this movie by myself as an 11-year-old child to do some research. Well, I didn't say it like that, but I was just kind of like, I'm gonna watch this, and it was like, okay, I'll see you after the movie. So I'm going to the theater, and it's like, it's very dark. The movie's already started. I think it was past some part. I was trying to figure out what was even going on in the movie because like I got in late. I didn't even watch the first one, right? I only watched The Mask before. So I didn't even know what the character was like. So I'm walking the sea of like white kids and their white dads, and I find a seat somewhere, and it's like a packed theater too. Like it's very like it's everyone's like watching this thing, and I'm sitting in the theater and I'm like clocking like, oh, they're laughing at that. Why are they laughing at that? And like kind of like reverse engineering the humor and being like, oh, okay, that's kind of funny. Okay. And over time, I kind of like started to assume much more of a Jim Carrey-esque type character in middle school that I somewhat like kind of like developed, kind of like just a slapsticky, smart-alecky, like kind of like weaponizing my intelligence, to kind of defend myself sometimes and whatever and whatnot. And so that's kind of like how I was programmed. I was literally programmed by Hollywood, right? Like a lot of my personality comes from Mr. Carrey, I feel like. And so sometimes I'm not even sure where that, me begins and him ends. It's kind of reminiscent of his Jim and Andy Netflix documentary when he played, Andy Kaufman on Man on the Moon. I actually never watched that movie. I should watch that. But yeah, it just goes to show you, Heath Ledger, people go crazy when they act like someone else, right? Sorry. So that's kind of like how I realized, okay, even I'm not immune to propaganda. Everyone is susceptible to propaganda. If you are an American, you have probably been propagandized. Like there's zero chance you have not been. And so, yeah, over time, I guess I was somewhat successful at the Jim Carrey stuff and developing more of a outgoing personality. I would say I moved from like the fourth quintile of popularity to the second quintile. It's a nice 40 to 50% bump. I would say in popularity. I think it was respectable for an autistic Asian guy to reach that. And I think, I found myself LARPing everything I could after that, when I was obsessed with emo music, I was obsessed with, I was playing that music. I would try to like, I guess like that's why I became an artist, right? Because I'm trying to do this stuff that I'm seeing, and make cool stuff. But yeah, that's kind of like how I realized I was, I was also propagandized. I began to see the propaganda, once I left Hollywood, I could definitely see the propaganda for what it was. Now I'm just kind of like, and I'm reading Marxism and getting educated on what's going on. I feel like I'm seeing the Matrix now. And yeah, so I want to go into what the Matrix is, I guess, like, or what is this Matrix? So let's start with the history of Hollywood, or I guess film in general, right? So motion picture technology was developed in the late 19th century. There were several players in that market. Thomas Edison was kind of like the biggest one. In 1896, there was a movie that was released. I think it was like a 50-second movie. It was called L'arrivée d'un train en gare de la Ciotat. I probably butchered that, but it's the arrival of a train at La Ciotat station. My French is a little old, so sorry about that. But apparently in the film, it's just like a 50-second like a camera on a thing where the steam locomotive pulls into the train station. It's rumored that audience members ran out of the theater because they thought it was an actual train coming towards the theater. That could possibly just be a rumor to boost the hype. But there was panic and stuff like that, and so it's clear that movie had an appreciable impact on people's perception of reality. So Thomas Edison actually didn't invent like the projector theater thing. That I think was the Lumiere brothers, but he invented what's called the kinetoscope, which is basically it's kind of like when you go to like those eye doctor test things, it's like you have to like look through the thing to see how big the letters are or whatever, or read the letters. That's kind of like what it was. And then, you would be displayed, I guess, like film, and you would see these moving pictures. And that's kind of how it would work. And because like only one person could view it at a time. So it was extremely like old school virtual reality, I guess, where you can only see one person could see it. And so Edison's first film studio he built in West Orange, New Jersey, which is North New Jersey, in 1893. The film studio was called the Black Maria. This studio produced these film strips that you would run through the kinetoscope, right? And so they began commercial operation in 1894, and the Holland brothers opened the first kinetoscope parlor in New York City. So kinetoscope parlor would just be where they would have a bunch of these, like 5 or so of these machines, and patrons would pay like, let's say $0.25, and they can like kind of like go through this parlor, watch their screen, line up to watch the screen, and then move on to the next one. So these were kind of like the first films. They weren't like crazy like things, but they were typically segments of what people watched anyway, right? Like there were magic shows, there were plays, there were vaudeville performances. There were stuff from I think there was this Buffalo Bills Wild West show. I don't know what that is, but that was popular, I guess, back then. And then boxing matches, cockfights, and of course, scantily clad women. Little softcore pornography. So kinetic scope parlors, they opened up in San Francisco, Chicago, Atlantic City. It was this new technology. It was exploding in popularity. And then in 1901 in Oberlin, Ohio, the first movie was projected on screen. So that was like the kind of the thing that I was talking about before, the 1896 thing, the train thing. So the Lumiere brothers, they created that screen projector thing. And then in 1901, it was the first time it came to America. And so this started the transition from kinetoscope screen, viewing to screen viewing, because like now it's become, much more convenient, right? You can just watch the screen, and, it's become more of a social experience too, because like now you can see how the audience reacts. And so it's much more superior experience. So that took over. So Edison builds a new movie studio in New York City to take advantage of this development. And he demolishes his old original Black Maria in 1903. So because it's in New Jersey, as word spread about this new technologies, performers flocked from all over the country to Thomas Edison to appear in their films. It's kind of like old school Instagram, right? All these influencers coming to you to be like, hey, like I want to be on Instagram and TikTok and, be an influencer, right? It was kind of like that in the early 1900s. And so Edison would use their celebrity status as kind of like advertising, right? He would take pictures with all these celebrities or these performers and put them in newspapers and be like, hey, like I'm with this influencer, I guess, this old school influencer. And so because cities and towns in northern New Jersey were much, much cheaper than New York City. And that's less the case these days. But back then, it was probably like a lot cheaper. And it's probably still a lot cheaper than New York. Manhattan's fucking crazy right now. But film studios, therefore, they all congregated in this town called Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is now known for being a very Korean-centric city. It's funny how that works. So most of the major kind of like film studios, a lot of them today, like MGM, Fox, the precursors to Universal, Paramount, Columbia, a lot of other defunct studios now as well. They started their operations out of New York and Fort Lee, New Jersey. Unfortunately, Edison was more of a capitalist rather than a visionary, and so he wanted to monopolize film production and exhibition and profit through patent enforcement. So what he would do is he would say, hey, if you want to use this technology, if you want to make these films, you got to pay us a fee. If you want to show these films, you got to pay us a fee. If you want to do anything, you got to pay us a fee, right? He wants his cut, I guess. And so he created like these patent like goons that would literally chase people down if they were using unlicensed equipment and stuff like that. He also created the Motion Picture Patents Company, in which he would conglomerate all these different like big time studios or filmmakers or whatever, and they would make like a consortium of like the trust to combine their patents and then sue independent filmmakers for patent infringement if they didn't pay the high fees, right? So Edison wanted to also like, I guess like he didn't want it to be too crazy. He just wanted these short films that people would just keep watching or whatever. So like keep the train going, keep the thing like don't what's the term? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That was kind of like his idea. Like this business is like printing money, and I want to continue printing money. So that's kind of like what he was thinking. So by 1910, a lot of the early filmmakers were like, "Fuck that shit. Let's go to Los Angeles," right? Like we can't like make films if this fucking crazy dude is trying to chase us down with these like goons, these fucking patent goons. So there were a couple of reasons for that. Obviously they're way farther from New York, so patent legislation, subpoena might take a few hours in New York, right? If you're in the same town. But if you're all the way in LA, a subpoena can take several days, and like you could kind of like just skirt it. So that's kind of like why they moved to LA in the first place. But then they also were going to be close to the Mexican border, right? Because I think the Mexican border is like 90 miles away from here, like 100, 120, something like that. So in case they were accosted by Edison's goons, who did actually go all the way to LA to chase some of these guys, they would be able to run to Mexico so they can escape the goons. But obviously, now we all know the weather here is superb, and so before you had to use studio time, you had to film at a studio, whatever. Now you had like 365 days of like sunlight. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating. It's probably like more like 330 days of sunlight. But it's just like a lot of sunlight. You can predict the weather, and that was important for exteriors, right? Like if you want to shoot outside, it's important for the weather to cooperate, especially for lighting and other kinds of things. And so they moved to LA and they never looked back. And most of them set up shop by 1913, the biggest ones that today. And then in a twist of irony, MPCC was found to be in violation of an antitrust law and was dissolved in 1915. So with the break of that trust and the loss of the European markets after World War I, because Europe was kind of fucked up after that, Edison's film business actually went defunct in 1918, and the New York film scene just basically disappeared. The fortunes were a lot different in sunny California, because after that said, the same war I talked about, because of the decline of the film and European film industry, now they have no competitors. Now they can run the table. So while the 1918 flu did damage the business a little bit, Los Angeles' response to that was also better than the rest of the country, and so they were able to kind of like stabilize really quickly, even after the Spanish flu that did not come from Spain. It came from Kansas. Sorry, just a side note. And so with the primary competitors out of the way, with Edison's goons out of the way, Hollywood was going to explode. So in the 1920s, it did. By 1920 itself, 80% of U.S. films were being produced out of Hollywood. So most of these early studios were started by Eastern European Jews. And the reason for that is because from Imperial Russia, there was an assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881. And there was the group that assassinated him. I think there was one Jewish woman out of like 12 anarchists or something like that who killed the Tsar. But because of that, the Tsar Alexander III made like super anti-Semitic laws, and like all these pogroms started happening. And so a lot of these Russian Jews fled, or Eastern European Jews, because it wasn't all Russia. Imperial Russia wasn't all Russians, but they all fled to America, kind of like in the New York area during the time. And so that's kind of like why a lot of Hollywood studios were started by Jews, because they were literally in that vicinity, in that area when it all started. But because of also because of general xenophobia and racism, America used to be pretty anti-Semitic as well during that time. And so they couldn't really integrate in big business or anything like that. So they kind of saw this new opportunity and said, hey, like, we can make money doing this, starting Nickelodeons and starting theaters. And so after starting those Nickelodeons, they started to move into production. So some of these big names that today, like Samuel Goldwyn, who's like that's like the lion in the MGM thing. William Fox, part of Fox. Carl Laemmle, I don't know how to say that. He's kind of like was one of the first people at Universal. Adolf Zukor was at one of the founders of Paramount, I think. Louis B. Mayer was MGM, and the Warner Brothers. Harry, Albert, Samuel, Jack. Those are the Warner Brothers, in case you wanted to know. So they all switched the production side and started created their own studios. And these are the dominant studios that you kind of like know of today. So while still kind of in its nascent stages, the American government still quickly recognized a powerful propaganda potential for film. After declaring war against Germany in 1917, President Wilson established the Committee on Public Information to manage public opinion and rally support for the war effort, because people weren't all on board with, especially pro-Germans, right? They were like, why are we fighting Germany? What's going on? We're not even in this war. So the CPI would push for films like The Kaiser. I think there was A Beast of Berlin in 1918 and The Hun Within in 1918. So it's interesting to see, like, with all this anti-Asian propaganda before, and anti-Japanese and anti-Soviet and whatever. It's just like kind of like the flavor of the month, if you're an enemy of America, they're going to be anti-you. They're going to be anti-Muslim when we're in Afghanistan. They're going to be anti-German when we're in Germany, for no reason. So even back then they were making like kind of like somewhat racist anti-German films, like The Hun Within, like what is like, and Charlie Chaplin made a short called The Bond to promote the sale of war bonds. So 60 films would be made with CPI input, as studios also saw the profit in selling patriotism. Like, I was like, some people are patriotic and we can sell this stuff. So they were very obvious propaganda. Like, if we saw them today, we'd be like, yeah, this is propaganda. So back then, propaganda wasn't very complicated. But then again, it was because the format was so new that the propaganda worked, because it was just kind of like, that's cool. Like, all this information. But like, because we've seen content, video content for all of our lives now, we're not so easily fooled by that sort of overt sort of propaganda. So then afterwards, after World War One, the Roaring Twenties, we were making a lot of money. America was making a lot of money in the Roaring Twenties, not just because of the movie business, but because there was electricity for all these appliances now. Yes, we had electricity before, but I think in 1920s they were starting to make all these appliances that people could buy, like consumers could buy, and so incredible growth also dovetailed into more money in people's pockets, right, to watch these movies. So 5,000 screens were installed by 1929 all over the country, which fueled a $1 billion economy in Hollywood. And that was a 2,000% growth from 1920. So in 10 years, they had 20x their revenue. So it was massive growth. And then in 1927, Warner Brothers takes a gamble and introduces the talkie, which is the first film that had synchronized sound. So they didn't have the technology to do it both, in tandem. So they had to record it, but then it would synchronize with the film. And so that technology, I guess, was released in 1927, which was, I think it was, what was it? It was a bunch of money at the time, but the gamble paid off because weekly, after the talkie came out, audience numbers doubled, right? So then by the end of the 1920s, 110 million people per week, or 110 million tickets were sold per week in Hollywood. And the population was 121 million. So literally 92% of the population is now watching, all these every week. 91% of every week they're watching movies. So this was pretty much the golden age. This age will never come back. That's for fucking sure. So then, obviously, in 1929, as most of you may know, is when the Great Depression started, because that was Black Tuesday, I believe. I think it was in October or something like that. But yeah, so the Depression did affect business for Hollywood, but it still actually thrived. It didn't do as well financially, but because the ticket sales were still pretty low compared to most other kind of fun options, people still went to the movies because they were so depressed from the Depression. They were like, hey, let me lift my spirits for 25 cents, for a couple hours. Sit in a theater for a couple hours. So during this time, while the business didn't grow, they still became more and more popular in America, and more kind of ingratiated in American culture. So the other thing too is that I guess this is the psychology element to it too, of that depression stuff. Nowadays, if you're depressed or whatever, if you have mental health issues, a psychiatrist just shoves some SSRIs down your throat and you're supposed to be all good. But back then, this was kind of like therapy. This was they're oh, this is kind of going to help me through a little bit of my depression. And science actually kind of proves why. Apparently recent psychological studies, someone else told me this, but recent psychological studies have shown that when you watch a movie in a theater, in a dark theater, your brain is actually being influenced in a way that's similar to when you're in REM sleep. REM sleep is when you're in rapid eye movement, when your eyes moving all over the place while you're asleep. And that's when you're dreaming. And so in a way, when you're watching a movie, you're somewhat activating kind of the same sort of neurological process as when you're dreaming. And so when you're dreaming, sometimes a lot of the stuff that, happened during the day or whatever kind of gets emotionally resolved or whatever. And so you're actually kind of doing that resolution when you're watching a movie. Ostensibly, if you're watching a pleasant movie. If you're watching a traumatizing movie, that might make it worse. But if you're watching a pleasant movie, you're somewhat kind of replicating that REM sleep. And for your psychological, I guess, disposition. Probably doesn't work as well today because we've watched so many movies that like it probably doesn't have that same effect. But that was kind of like the psychological therapy at the time, early therapy. So then by the 1930s, Hollywood's only main competitor was UFA, which was a German film studio. But however, as all of you may know, the Nazi Party kind of took over Germany, and they turned all of their studios into overt propaganda film studios. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels kind of essentially controlled everything that was produced and distributed in Germany. Despite the Nazi Party's explicit anti-Semitism, however, most Hollywood studios still conducted business with Nazi Germany, even signing correspondence to Nazi officials with Heil Hitler. This was all before 1939, but because at the time, Germany was like, I think it was like the second or the third biggest market besides England and America in terms of like money, right? And so the studios, I guess, they thought that like, oh, Hitler, yeah, blah blah blah, he talks a big game, he's just a fad, he's gonna pass, and like, things will be fine. Well, the Nazis, whatever, they'll pass away, and it'll all be fine. Basically, they wanted to hold on to the German business because they thought the Nazi thing was going to be a temporary thing, and like, why sever connections when it's just going to be a thing. Fox, however, did take a stand. They boycotted. I think they boycotted working with the regime. But then after Poland was invaded in 1939, all the studios kind of like reversed their position. It was kind of like it was like a complete reversal in 1939. All the studios basically started making anti-Nazi content. Because America, as you all know, has stronger ties to Britain and France. So soon after, World War II ends, Hollywood reaches kind of like not its economic peak. I mean, it still makes more and more money over time. But I think it like, I guess more its dominant economic peak of like, market share is what I'm getting at. Yeah. Market share. So they had like basically, they controlled 70%, like these big five studios. I think they were MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, RKO, and 20th Century Fox. They controlled 70% of the market at the time. They were all vertically integrated in what's known as the studio system, which is basically where the studios, in a studio, they would actually hire actors, directors, and producers that would hire them for the studio, so that the studio itself, whenever it wanted to make a project, it would just use its stable of producers, actors, and writers or whatever and throw them into a project, and they would work for the studio. They wouldn't work for the movie itself. And so the studios had total control. They had all the money, like actors and writers and talent, they're all getting stiff. Let's be real. And so, the other thing too is that once you were contracted to a studio, you couldn't work for the other studios. So I think the studios also retained final cut privileges. So they would ensure that, they would want profit. Like, they don't want anything, anything that could be offensive or whatever, blah, blah, blah. They would like, no, stick to the script, sell the goods. We'll do okay. They were kind of like Edison at the time. Like, by that time, they were pretty much like Edison. Like, so, they had a steady profit making machine, but because of the Cold War, things got a little rocky. In 1947, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, that was an agency created in 1938 that was to blacklist communists in America. They convicted 10 major left-wing screenwriters and directors, half of them were Jewish, for refusing to answer questions about their political beliefs. So they would be hit with these contempt of Congress charges. Like, if you don't speak, then you get a charge of contempt of Congress. And so studios, therefore, would blacklist them. They were like, oh, we don't even want to touch these people anymore. And these 10 left-wing screenwriters, directors. And not only that, they fired like 300 other or blacklisted 300 other artists who were like directors, radio commentators, actors, but most of all screenwriters, because this is like who they were really targeting. They wanted to target the people who were writing stuff that people would be reading or watching, I guess. And they would also, Hollywood pivoted entirely too after that 47 or whatever in 1949 and 1952. They would make all this very overt anti-Soviet, anti-communist films and propaganda, to fit the theme of like what the American government was kind of doing. So while the Hollywood was hit by the right-wing McCarthyist censorship, it was also kind of like slammed by a leftist landmark antitrust 1948 case, Supreme Court case. It was United States versus Paramount Pictures. And the court ruled against the major studios, saying that their vertical integration was an illegal trust, and the studios were forced to end their monopolistic practices and divest their theater chains. Because before, the studios, they controlled the production and the theater change, so they could show whatever movies they want. So the theater chains had no, like they basically, if they controlled everything that people watched back then. So the case, the Supreme Court case, broke that up, and now they ended most of their monopolistic practices. And this started actually the independent film scene. So now like these more smaller studios could rise up and sort of make filmmakers could rise up and make this content. So, but RKO, they weren't able to kind of like adapt, I suppose, and they folded in 1957. While the little three, Universal, Columbia, and United Artists, they were kind of like next boys up and started to succeed in this new paradigm. And then finally, by 1950, Hollywood had a different non-political issue on its hand. The invention of the television, or I think it was before 1950. I don't know when television, but basically by 1955, half of American households had TVs, and this cut film attendance by 50%. And by 1959, for example, remember that 110 million weekly figures in 1929? That was cut to 40 million per week. And so the studios started to realize, oh, this TV is not a fad we can ignore. So before they were kind of like just, selling kind of like time to TV producers who wanted to use their lots for production, whatever. Now they were like, okay, now we need to actually make this stuff ourselves. So they first started by just showing their film content on TV, right? Like, licensing their film content to TV stations. But then they started to create separate divisions in their studio for television content. And by the 1960s, they started to make comparable revenue to Hollywood, the movie business. So by the 1960s, the effects of moving away from the studio system started to become apparent as filmmakers became much more experimental because more creative freedom. And the Hays Code, which was kind of like a restrictive censor on morally questionable content when our country was a little bit more puritanical in 1934, that was lifted in 1968. And so people could start talking about more risque type stuff. Also during this time was obviously the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. So this reflected a lot of like progressive stuff that was going on in the country, and there was also the growth of the youth culture that was going on. There was Woodstock and sex, drugs, rock and roll, the Beatles, all that stuff that was happening in the 1960s. Swingers, I'm thinking of Austin Powers, but this started to kind of like change the dynamic of Hollywood or of what they sort of produced in the 1960s. And so also during this time, MI6's best propaganda ever franchise James Bond debuted on the big screen in 1962 with Dr. No, played by the iconic Sean Connery. And this started one of the most successful franchises in movie history, of course, superseded by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So after the Vietnam War in the 1970s, Watergate and during the 1970s as well as all these kind of like JFK commissions and revelations of CIA and FBI, spying operations on Americans. And so people became really disillusioned with the government's anti-communist crusade and started to tune out. So by the 1970s, people started to be like, I just don't want to even think about this Vietnam thing anymore. Like, this is terrible. Like, what do we do here? So during the 1970s, they stopped being all political, and they started to make these fun blockbusters, right? 1975 was Jaws. I think it was Steven Spielberg's second movie, but it was a massive hit. And there was Star Wars in 1977 by George Lucas. And these were not only massive hits, but they were the first, like, I guess, big budget films or blockbuster films in the industry's history. Where Jaws, I think, had not the first in history, but they were like kind of like marketed in a way that was kind of like pioneering, because I think Jaws was $9 million budget and Star Wars was $11 million budget. And you laugh at those numbers now, and even like with inflation, they're probably only like 40, 50 or whatever million today. But back in the 1970s, before Jaws and Star Wars, the movie budgets would be around $1 to $5 million. They wouldn't be that high. And so they were massive hits. They generated incredible revenue, the Jaws and Star Wars. And they not only did that, they gave a lot of revenue from merchandising and licensing. The Star Wars toys, for example, would outpace the initial box office gross in 1978. And so they saw, I mean, like, all these execs saw like dollar signs. They were like, oh, we just need to make more and more bigger and badder movies, bigger franchises, more franchises, more sequels, more spectacle. We need to get butts in seats. The 4-quadrant thing started to come about. Like, how do we get, all the people in these 4 quadrants in our movies? Like, we need to make it as mass market appeal as possible to generate the most. So soon afterwards, like, budgets ballooned to like 10 to 20 on average. Like, from 1 to 5, it became 10 to 20 almost overnight in the 80s. And so in the 1980s also was an interesting wrinkle where we had our first president who was an actor, Ronald Reagan. He was also the SAG president during those, remember those 1947 HUAC, House of Un-American Activities Committee, I think, hearings. Well, he was actually the SAG president during that time. And then he outed other communists to Congress. Like, like, who knows? Like, maybe he just outed them because they were his competition. Like, that's the conspiracy theory I'm going with. So he was SAG president. He's outing communists to Congress who are being blacklisted. But then during the 1980s, he's now the president. He was also the governor of California in the 1960s. So he didn't just become president out of nowhere. He shifted into politics, I think, in the 1950s. And so he also deregulated much of the financial industry during that time, but he also deregulated the media industry. And he allowed for tax breaks and studio mergers. For example, I think Fox was sold to News Corp in 1985. That's Rupert Murdoch's company, right? So he deregulates the industry, and so they're making even more money here now. They're making money hand over fists. So they have franchises like Star Wars now, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters. The 1980s were just like franchise, like heaven. Everyone's making their franchises. So also during this time, the Soviets were kind of floundering in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is kind of like the Soviet Union's Vietnam, in which they were embroiled in a long conflict without discernible military goals, and kind of like drained their economy and resources to the point where, well, yeah, they fell like pretty soon afterwards. So seeing this, America sees all this, and they're like, okay, we got the Soviets on the ropes now. We need to push the pedal to the metal. So the Reagan administration makes an aggressive push against Soviet power. You know, there's anti-Vietnam War content that was still being made. You know, that was kind of talking about the 1970s, but then they were like, now we got to shift back to the Soviets, right? There's Rambo in 1985. There's Rocky IV in 1985, you know, when he's fighting Victor Drago for America and the Soviet Union. You know, there's Red Dawn in 1984. There's A Hunt for Red October in 1990. Firefox, I've never seen that actually, in 1982. Invasion USA in 1985. And of course, Top Gun in 1986. Now, let's talk about Top Gun for a bit. So during this time, like I said before, you know, the U.S. military was not popular at all. Like, the Vietnam War was very embarrassing to the American public. Like, people did not approve of the American, especially after they lost, and especially after like all that, you know, nonsense was going on. So then, to avoid talking about Vietnam, you know, Top Gun made a few little changes that made it very clever. First of all, they talked about the Navy. You know, Navy had very little to do with Vietnam. So, you know, you had Navy pilots that were flying these very cool, like, you know, F-14s and I did a little research on this. The reason they didn't use F-16s is because F-16 is Air Force, and F-14s were better suited at the time for Navy operations. You know, when you're flying off a carrier rather than like actually doing bombing runs or whatever Air Force does or whatever. Yeah, so then they did that, and Cruise's character, for example, is a young 20-something. He couldn't even have fought in Vietnam. He's too young, right? So he's cool, whatever. It's his father that kind of like, they talk about how his father died in a classified mission in 1965 in Laos, but they keep it very vague, so like you don't know like what actually happened, and that's kind of like a point, like kind of like the conceit of that relationship with Maverick to his father in that film. And so the movie itself is kind of like a showcase of American air superiority over the Soviet Union. So the film's climactic dogfight is the F-14. That was actually built specifically to counter Soviet MiG threats for the Navy. So they pit them in the movie against the Soviet MiG-28s. This was a fictional aircraft. It doesn't. I don't think MiG-28s actually exist, but they actually used a Northrop F-5E Tiger II. So that's an American plane, and they paint it dark with red stars on it, so it looks like it's a Soviet plane. Because apparently the Pentagon would not allow actual Soviet aircraft in the film. So in addition to the F-14s, the movie also showcased the USS Enterprise, which was, I think, one of their big carriers. So the film itself was a smash success. The public was sold on, and the public they're sold on Reagan's defense spending because I think it hits $282 billion in 1987. And when Reagan first took office, or before Reagan first took office in 1980, that was Carter's last year in office, it was $134 billion. So already, Reagan 2x's the military budget and is using all these films to kind of like justify it. And the public is like, yeah, we need these weapons to kill those crazy communists. You know, he promotes, I think he was like SDI defense, like the Star Wars defense. It was just like this idea that we could create like a Death Star type thing that would shoot down, you know, inner ICBMs that were threatening us. And it was just like, what are you talking about? That technology doesn't even exist like today. Like, get the hell out of here. It was just like talking about nonsense. So yeah, that was kind of like what that movie was made for. But also, after it was really successful, Navy recruiters were like, "Oh, let's set up booths right in front of the theater, right? Like, because when they're coming out like all jazzed about America, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I wanna fly some cool planes too. I wanna, join the Navy." And it worked because Navy recruitment moved up 500%. And then the Department of Defense themselves, they were like, "Oh shit, this is actually pretty powerful stuff." So in the future, if Hollywood, if you want to use our shit, we get final approval on all your scripts. And this is something that exists till to today, where if any Hollywood film uses an American military equipment in any way, the Pentagon has final say over that script. So censorship for you, right? So by the 1990s, the Soviets crumbled, obviously, and Hollywood was once again ascendant in terms of control and revenue streams. The economy was picking back up after, the Clinton administration, and we had won, right? We had won. We won the big battle, and so we were taking victory laps with our movies as well. I think that was Independence Day, right? Like the cheesy ID4 movie that like when you watch it today, you're like, oh my god, this is such fucking cringe. But like back then, like I remember even being like, oh, that was a fucking amazing movie. Will Smith and all this other stuff. You're just kind of like, oh, this is amazing, right? I didn't watch the sequel because I heard it's garbage. But I don't think a good sequel could be made for that movie because, like it was so patriotic. Yeah. So not only that, there was computer graphics started to become more widely used. So you had like revolutionary kind of films like Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park that used these advancements to get people like, holy shit, this is like cool shit. I remember, when I saw Terminator 2 for the first time, I was like, whoa, what is even going on right now? And obviously The Matrix in 1999, that was like, that was like a life changer for me. I actually watched that like during the 20th anniversary or something in theaters again, because I actually never watched that in theaters before. When I watched it in theaters, I was like, oh, this is gonna be awesome, and it was like, yeah, it's kind of old. like I don't know if I just feel like special effects, like there is a short shelf life for any special effect, unless like it's really good. Anyway, Hollywood makes even more money. They seem like they're just like printing money at this point. So during this time, a lot of the powerful people in Hollywood start to become more political because now that they have a little bit more dollars in their pocket, they're like, hey, let's get some influence. We want to influence the government to try to help our profit line, right? So understandably, they get more involved in politics, and political power players like Steven Spielberg starts a major Hollywood fundraiser for the Clinton administration, or Bill Clinton, I guess in 1992. Starting in the 1990s, donating to kind of like his campaigns, but also organizing a massive kind of network in Hollywood, like a Hollywood fundraiser to support the Democrats. And so while the movies at the time still tried to follow that 4-quadrant mass market appeal, it was clear that Hollywood itself was turning a little bit more liberal, or the creators were heading towards more of a liberal direction during the 1990s. Over time, like Steven Spielberg's, I guess, network or whatever, they donated like around $3 billion for all of like the Clintons' various campaigns, for Hillary Clinton as well, for senator and president and all that stuff. So Steven Spielberg and a lot of these power players in Hollywood, they've been donating to the Democrats for a long, long time. So then the success continues onto the 2000s, but the tone kind of shifts after 9/11, as many movies and shows were made to reflect anti-Muslim sentiment. One of them was one of my favorite shows, 24. This actually was produced before 9/11, but later seasons kind of talked about Muslims and terrorists, and I was just kind of like, yeah, there's a little propagandy, but whatever. And so other kinds of content, like big content, started to reflect this kind of anti-Muslim sentiment, as we became embroiled in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, 2003. But also during this time, that's when I was talking about. This is during the time that Sopranos started the golden age of television, launching in 1999. So I guess what was new about The Sopranos was that it was a first kind of this serialized TV show where the story arcs would unfold over like entire seasons rather than either the episode itself or a few seasons or a few episodes or whatever. So you would have like an entire arc of stories. And while there were kind of like serialized shows before that, like I Love Lucy and stuff like that, they didn't have like a main, like all the way through there's you kind of follow Tony Soprano's life as a mafia don, and it's kind of like about that journey of his life. With these other shows, it would mostly be about like one kind of like storyline during that time or whatever, but they would never really go past the season, any one storyline. And so this is kind of like an addictive format, because like in order to watch it, you have to know everything that happened. You have to start from the beginning. You can't start The Sopranos on season 3 and expect to know what's going on, because there's so much stuff that happened. So that's what started this new popular sort of show. And the reason kind of like why it started being successful, because this is the kind of the time where Hollywood sort of shifted more into spectacle rather than substance, like because of all these blockbusters that I talked about, Jaws, whatever, all these franchises. People were more talking like, hey, let's try to make the big concept, the big 4-quadrant thing that doesn't offend anyone. And like, while that's fun, like I went to all those movies in 1990s, and it's a fun experience, a fun ride. It's not really like a deep kind of like movie going experience. And so during this time, that's when TV started to become more quality. Not only did The Sopranos on HBO, which was a premium cable channel, that because it's a premium cable channel, the creators were given free reign. They didn't have any sponsors to cater to. They didn't have any FCC rules to follow. So they were able to use like, nudity, profanity, violence, stuff that you would never see in a network TV show. So that gave it more of kind of like TV's, like more of an authentic feel to the television, like to The Sopranos. And the last thing that they did was they kind of started to also blur the lines between TV actors and movie actors. They hired kind of like some Hollywood movie talent in that TV show to kind of like up the quality of the acting in this show. Because before The Sopranos, there would kind of be like a tier system, like in terms of like actors and writers or whatever. Like TV was great and all, but it was lower tier than movie. Like if you wanted to be like prestige in Hollywood, you wanted to be in the movies. You didn't want to be on TV. TV was like kind of like, yeah, you might work there for a little bit, but you want to eventually make it to the movies. So that was kind of like the idea or the principle at the time. But that's when The Sopranos is kind of like when that started to shift a little bit. And so after the success of The Sopranos, they created shows like The Wire, 6 Feet Under, Dexter, Mad Men, The Walking Dead, and Breaking Bad. A lot of these shows, The Wire and 6 Feet Under, were HBO. Dexter I think there was Homeland as well. Was that in the 2000s? I think that was. Those were Showtime, and then Mad Men, The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad. Those were all AMC. Um, and so these premium cable channels, they're starting to make like I guess golden age content on TV. So the major studios also tried to cash in on this trend, like creating the show like I told you about, 24, and Lost, which was a huge smash success. You have to, yeah, so all those shows you had to watch, maybe 24 is different because it's like season to season, so you can kind of like watch one season contained, but you still had to watch, the first episode to know what was going on, of the whole thing. So you had to watch every episode in that season to understand what was going on. Same thing with Lost. It was the same kind of thing where you had to watch the entire thing. I recently watched it again myself. It's not as bad as I remembered because I remember the second half being kind of like not as tightly written, I feel like. But I enjoyed myself. Anyway, sorry about that side. So these shows actually created massive revenue for the industry. They boosted, I think they boosted Hollywood revenues even further because, like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know exactly, but Hollywood itself, I think, generated around $150 billion in the 2000s. So you got to remember that just 30 years prior, Hollywood generated around $15 billion in the 1970s. And there was a lot of, I'm not going to say that was like apples to apples comparison. There was a lot of inflation, obviously, in the 1970s and 80s. But, even correcting for that, that's probably still maybe 2x or 3x. So it's still like, it's still 4 to 5 times bigger, at this point. So they're making a lot of money. But by the 2010s, Hollywood then now has integrated into becoming fully liberal, like very openly liberal. Powerful leaders in Hollywood supported, I think, this all basically started, with Obama's kind of presidency, how Hollywood basically shifted all the way liberal in order to kind of like capitalize on the wokeonomics movement, which you can catch on my previous video for the full analysis on that. But basically, stuff like even the content itself started to trend more and more liberal in especially in the 2010s. And franchises and sequels are also what marked this era, and it became even crazier with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because it started in 2008, but it became the highest grossing franchise in film history. I think it churned out like several $1 billion blockbusters by the end of the decade. Like I think it was like $5 to $6 billion at least. Not only that, on I guess like the artsy side, there was movies like 12 Years a Slave, Moonlight, and Green Book, kind of like pandering. These movies to me are more like pandering movies rather than like actual movies like black people really were excited about. While they would also make a movie they were excited about this movie, which was a black superhero teaming up with a CIA agent to fight another black person trying to liberate his people from white people. And that movie found massive success in the black American community. In any case, woke sold, woke was popular, woke was in, as we all know. And so Hollywood made even more money in the 2010s. So I think they made around $200 billion. This is not just the box office. This is like DVD sales, streaming sales, and all that whatnot. Because I think I mentioned that box office, like 10 billion or 11, 12 billion or something. But, they're making money on all these other kind of like verticals. And so that kind of like actually seems a little high, actually. I'm going to have to double check that number. But they made a lot of money. And it seemed like they would still be making a lot of money. But then 2020 happened. and the pandemic and blah 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 and all that stuff and all the stuff that you're probably familiar with. But before we want to make the final analysis, let's go kind of like into why the Hollywood was like inevitable decline. Like the decline to me was inevitable, and a big part of that was technology, right? Even when the TV came out in the 1950s, they didn't immediately embrace the technology. They kind of like were like, oh, what is this thing? Blah blah blah. And eventually, when they saw the money coming in, they were like, oh, okay, we gotta take over, and we gotta use this ourselves. But when the internet and all this other stuff came out, they kind of slept at the wheel a bit. So let's go into like why. I mean, like when you examine the average, I guess, Gen Z person, sooner or later, I guess I'm gonna have to transit to Gen Alpha, because I feel like Gen Z is now like well into their 20s and 30s, or are they in their 30s? I don't even fucking know. Anyway, ask a typical 30 to 34-year-old today what they spend their money on entertainment now. And it's kind of like, 50 years ago, if you were to ask somebody, what 34-year-old, what do you do for fun, right? They would say, hang out with my friends, play sports, whatever. And then they would say TV and movies, right? Because that was the only kind of like options. But when you ask a 18 to 34-year-old now what they spend their money on, it's video games, it's streaming sites, it's social media, to individualized pornography. So we have massive and high quality TVs now that can replicate this experience of being in a theater. And then we can also access content from all over the world, from anyone in the world who has access to the internet. We have these mini supercomputers in our pockets. We have these tablets that we carry onto the airplanes, since we don't want to be bored on the airplanes. We just have to have constant interaction with the screen. We've basically, like in a way, we've kind of recreated the world of Minority Report, just with all these screens, like, kind of like just shooting information at our eyes. So the first thing that kind of happens with this, right? Like let's start with video games. So in the 1970s, the video games started out kind of like the initial, like the kinetoscope I was talking about, like the initial movie theater, right? Like the one person player thing. They would start out as these large arcade units, and I think it was like the early 1970s. Atari came out with Pong, and some of these other arcade games came out, and patrons would go to an arcade room. I guess like they wouldn't call it an arcade parlor. They would kind of what do you call arcade rooms? I guess it's just called the arcade. And you would pay a certain fee, like these Nickelodeons, to play the game, usually around a quarter, right? And soon, these arcade games would make a home version where you could, get a console to play these games yourself, to hook up to your TV. And so these these consoles in the beginning, they would only be able to play one game. So you'd literally have a console that was just playing Pong, in 1972 or something, 74 or whatever like that. And these were actually not that cheap. I mean, they were like $100 at the time, but $100 back then is now like $500 now. Now realizing maybe Hollywood isn't making that much more money now. Like, the inflation was pretty bad back then. Anyway, so arcade revenue right off the bat, they were a huge financial hit. People were going to the arcades, whatever, like paying a quarter to play these games. Very addictive stuff. I mean, if you played video games before, you know what I'm talking about. And so in the 1980s, they were, like that's why when you see all these 1980s kind of like, propaganda or whatever, like Stranger Things, you're always seeing arcade games, because they were pretty ubiquitous back then. In 1982, the arcade revenue would peak at around $8.9 billion. So $8.9 billion of quarters are going to these fucking arcade games. And so total revenue per year. What? That doesn't make sense. Sorry about that. Um, there was a lot of there was billions of dollars being made, or that's the main point. But then in 1983 there was a crash because, like the Edison people or like the studio system, they kind of like didn't really want to take any chances, and they just like were like, oh, all we have to do is put out all this slop and these bad games, and people will buy them or play them. And they were wrong because there was a huge crash. They were oversaturating the market with shitty titles. Um, they made the mistake that quantity meant more profits. So Nintendo, which was a company in Japan, learned from Atari's mistakes and soon would not only revive the video game industry, but dominate it in the 1980s. So Japanese companies like Nintendo, Sega, and later on Sony, they would dominate the console market in the 1980s and 1990s until 2001, when Microsoft introduced the Xbox. Computer games were also being kind of like developed during this time. They sort of inhabited different sorts of spheres. I mean, computer games were more like adventure based, or like, it wouldn't be like very like, super like crazy whatever, until maybe like more in the late 90s, early 2000, maybe they started to trend in that direction. But they're making video games, and then they're making video games on PCs, because like now during the 1990s, more and more people are getting PCs due to the popularity of Windows 95. Now it was very easy to use a computer, because back in the day, I was using, computers as a kid. I think starting in 1989, I think my parents got like this dinky IBM 286 that I would just try to like tinker on a little bit. But later on, obviously, we got Gateway 2000, I think, Pentium processor, and the games were a lot more complex. So then by the 2000s, video games actually went social. I mean, it was earlier than that actually, but by the 2000s, it became very popularized. There was World of Warcraft, right? You had people just like basically living their lives on the internet. They were buying games, and they were auctioning off items that they would win in World of Warcraft to other people for real money. So right off the bat, like, video game developers are seeing this. They're like, oh, we need to take advantage of this. Blizzard and all these other companies, they start thinking like, how do we make games so people like want to buy and collect items or whatever? And so that trend started to happen. Games like Metal Gear Solid were kind of blurring the edges between like cinema and gaming, because it's like a very cinematic type sort of game. In the 2000s was really when like, video games before were more relegated to like, oh, that's nerd shit. Oh, like only nerds fucking play video games. What is that shit? But by 2000 it became very popular, where even the jocks were playing video games. I remember in the 2000s, well, the big popular game was Super Smash Brothers, I think, on Melee on GameCube, I want to say. And yeah, we were playing that in college dorms like nearly every fucking day. It was just it was a blast. But anyway, so then, video games, it was very clear that young people were starting to become much more obsessed about video games than they were about movies. Because like, it made a lot more economic sense, right? Because like, let's say you want to watch a movie, or take a date out on a movie and like get some concessions or whatever. That could be up to like, $40-$50 now. What is the price of ticket? That could be like more than that actually, these days. But if you wanted to buy a video game, that's like around $50 to $60 or $70 or whatever. You buy it once and you get to play like 50, 60, 70, 80 hours. So like 2 hours versus 50 hours. You're just kind of like, and I don't have to leave my home. It becomes like a very easy decision for a lot of young kids to just buy the video game. So initially, Hollywood didn't know what to make of video games, because they were like, oh, this is Japanese stuff or whatever. I don't even understand what's going on. They even made some like Super Mario Brothers movie it was very clear that they didn't understand video games at all. Because that movie, I don't know if I saw that movie or not, but I remember people saying it was terrible. I think they also made like a Street Fighter movie, and that was also kind of campy and stupid. But they didn't really understand why video games were popular, and that's why they made a bunch of video game flop movies at the time. But nowadays, video games are even more ubiquitous than Hollywood. I think they have nearly 10 times the revenue of the box office. That's why the $200 billion figure doesn't make sense. I'm gonna have to figure that out. I don't think Hollywood made $200 billion recently, because video games made $208 billion in 2024, and I'm very certain that Hollywood is maybe a third of that at most. So yeah, I think my numbers were off. I want to say Hollywood makes around $50 to $60 billion a year from all of its box office, TV, and physical digital sales and all that jazz. So then, because video games are all the rage and it's in the zeitgeist, right? Movies are in the zeitgeist, video games are. These studios have started to make video game content, like pretty good stuff too, like Last of Us on HBO, and then there's Fallout on Amazon. Actually, I haven't seen Last of Us. I'll probably watch it at some point because I have the game and I wanted to play the game first. I did watch Fallout. Christopher Nolan, I think, writes that show, and it's pretty good. I enjoyed it. It's not the craziest thing, but it was all right. But the thing about those things is they're original concepts. Well, they're not really original because they have a built-in. The video people who play those video games are like, oh yeah, I want to see this version of the video game I just watched. So they instantly became pretty popular hits on HBO and Amazon. But this still won't stop the tides of kids just spending more and more of their disposable income on video games over Hollywood, because it's just kind of like I said, the math just doesn't make sense. Streamers and other content creators they're even making money just making video game content. Like, people are making money by just playing video games on the internet now. Like, it's just like the attention given to video games over Hollywood for the young is just more and more every year. People are like not caring about movies at all of the young. So me personally, I feel like I could say all this because I personally grew up addicted to video games. I watched a lot of movies as well over time, over in my 20s, I guess, more so because I had an internet T1 line and I could download every movie I ever wanted to watch that my parents never let me watch because they were conservative Christian parents and also cheap as fuck. So I watched a bunch of movies in my 20s, but when I was growing up, all the entertainment I had was basically, TV during the Disney afternoons, because I didn't even get to watch Saturday morning cartoons. That was a big thing in my generation because I went to fucking Korean school that I hated. So all of my actual entertainment was video games. The stuff that I feel like I grew up with in terms of story and entertainment, that was video games for me. Video games plus Jim Carrey. But I would be obsessed with JRPGs, the Japanese RPGs like Final Fantasy series or Chrono Trigger. I'd play these over and over and over again. I'd be obsessed with I'd be so obsessed. I would take these their instruction booklets with me when I was just going out, and I would smell the instruction booklet. That new game smell. I would just smell the instruction booklet until that new game smell was not there anymore. That's how obsessed I was over video games. So I know for a fact that if kids are like me, they don't give a shit about movies today. So then also as an Asian kid, in the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese video games just felt more relatable to me overall because Hollywood is not making content really for Asian kids or Asian people in general. Not today, not before, and definitely not before. And so it makes sense, right? Because the same 50 or so, like before the 2000, before the liberal woke stuff that happened, it was pretty fucking white in Hollywood, like really fucking white. Like I think it was basically the same 50 or so white male execs that were choosing what you saw. So yes, it became a little more decentralized because now there's 50 execs instead of 5 studio heads. But it's still a very limited tastemaker group that was deciding what you saw. And so none of these people would make a lot of stuff that I would really want to watch. So yeah, I was obsessed with video games. And so while Hollywood and video games, they were never direct competitors per se, like when you look at how kids are, the spending habits of kids, that's when you're like, oh wait, they now are competitors, because essentially what it's become is a competition for your attention. There's only so many hours of the day you can be distracted, right? And so many hours you can look at a screen per day. And now the game is like, how many of those hours can I capture? Because like the average person now, or especially the average young person, it's pretty much like terminally online at this point. I've been terminally online since the age of 13. But most people my age and older. And so this is kind of like a newer thing where kids, I think like around Gen Z and younger, have pretty much been terminally online their entire lives because the access was there. And so when you think about it that way, you're kind of competing for, let's say they're awake for 16 hours of the day and they're pretty much online or have some sort of access to a screen for and is watching something, maybe let's say 10 of those hours a day. that might be a bit of a over exaggeration, but that's like, so movies, if you want to take any of those 10 hours, you got to make a pretty sizable pitch to get that, butt in the seat. And the numbers show that, right? So then the other competitor was obviously streaming, right? So we talked about growth of... No, we didn't talk about that. Oh, okay. So then streaming started, obviously, with YouTube. This was started by some early employees of PayPal in 2005. I think there was an Asian guy in there somewhere, which is cool. But they had... PayPal had just been bought by eBay, so they got a nice little exit. I think that was the same thing Elon Musk made a lot of money from as well. And so they created YouTube, which was basically a site where anyone could post a video. So for the first time, well, not for the first time. I think there was other video sharing sites to begin with, but for the first time, like when this became big, any individual with a camera and a computer and an internet connection, you could share the video with the entire world. So YouTube actually had some trouble getting off the ground initially, but then once someone posted or reposted a clip of SNL's Lazy Sunday skit from the Lonely Island, and that went viral in 2006. I think that was probably the first thing that was viral. I think that created the term viral, right? Or whatever. And then Universal had the video taken down because of copyright, right? But then because of that, more third-party content started to be uploaded on YouTube. People started to be like, oh, let's put stuff on it, whatever. And then Google, seeing the success, acquires YouTube in 2006. And then they rebrand it with the slogan, broadcast yourself. I think there was a metric that said by 2007, YouTube had consumed as much bandwidth as the entire internet in 2000. So just 7 years later, they're generating all this traffic to YouTube. So everyone's going to YouTube. But instead of seizing on this opportunity, like Universal, Hollywood considered YouTube to be a passing fad, more related to content that would never threaten them, as their production value would never be matched by any of these random people. And so, they were correct, right? Initially, just like TV, right? Like initially, TV didn't threaten Hollywood because it was kind of like not everyone had a TV, right? But then by 1955, by the end of the 1950s, most people did have a TV, and they were like, oh shit, we gotta do something about this. But then with the internet, it was kind of like a little less apparent about what was going on, I guess. So then they didn't pay attention to YouTube at all, I guess, until it was too late, because by 2007, they also introduced monetization for some of its elite creators, to I guess entice people. Like this was like kind of like the Edison model, where people were coming to YouTube to be a new kind of star or a new kind of influencer. And so by 2012, the people that could make money on YouTube, that was expanded to include any creator that hit certain criteria. So I think it's like you have to get like 1,000 subscribers, and you have to upload a certain amount of videos before you can start monetizing them, and stuff like that. And so this exploded the business of YouTube significantly. And there was the adpocalypse, I guess, in 2017, and that was related to I think it was when like PewDiePie or someone like that like made some sort of Nazi video where they hired someone on Fiverr to write "I love Nazis" or something like that, or some stupid racist thing that stunt that he did that made YouTube crack down on like censorship, like because like they didn't want to offend their corporate sponsors, right? Like anyone putting an ad next to a Nazi thing, it's just kind of like, why am I paying for this shit? Like, are you kidding me? So that's kind of like when YouTube somewhat went censored a little bit in 2017, but they still were able to make a shit ton of money. I think they made around $30 billion in the 2020s per year, well eclipsing the Hollywood's box office receipts, right? I think by 3 or 4 times. And so while YouTube isn't a competitor, again, YouTube and video games, they're not direct competitors for their narrative content, but they began having growing dominance over the reality market, and podcasts or talk shows. And content like that started to become really popular on YouTube over like the same kind of things like talk shows on regular TV or network TV or Hollywood stuff. People started to go to like channels like Mr. Beast for reality content, and yeah, they kind of took over some of those, took some little bites out of the Hollywood pie. And in addition, other social media platforms that were like Instagram and TikTok, they're just much more engaging and attractive to the young. Even Twitter has their own monetization option, right? So then the social media wars between like Instagram and I guess TikTok and all those other players, they have started kind of like an arms race of content where they're trying to entice the other people to come to their platform to make content on their platform. And they're making tons of money too. Instagram, I think, made $65 billion in 2024 alone, while TikTok generate about $23 billion. So they're making all this money from these ad agencies because ad agencies, now they realize ads on TV suck balls because nobody's fucking watching TV. So they got to put it in front of your eyes, right? So you see, Google, Facebook, Instagram, all these people, they make most of their money from advertisements, from sponsors. And so they want you to see more and more advertising. So they want you to watch more and more video content. And so this is going to eat more and more into the attention. Like I said, those 10 hours, let's say per day that you're talking about, more and more of those time brackets are being eaten away by social media and video games. And finally, for the coup de grace was big tech itself, right? So then Netflix began as a tech 1.0 company. It was founded in 1997. And the business model was basically to displace Blockbuster. So for the young people who don't know what Blockbuster is, before Netflix, and before all this other stuff, if you wanted to buy or if you wanted to watch an old movie, you had to rent it. You had to rent it from a place like Blockbuster, or I think my local place had like a local video rental store, and you would go to the thing. They would have all these VHS tapes laid out, and you would pick what you wanted to watch. You can pick like multiple titles if you wanted to do a marathon, I guess. And you would pay like, let's say the VHS tapes were like $20 back in the day. You pay like $5 to rent it for like 2 or 3 days, and then you would return it, and then blah blah blah. But then I guess one of the founders of Netflix, they ran up a bunch of late fees, and they were like, well, this sucks. I don't want to pay late fees. So they came up with Netflix to where the model was basically you would see all the titles instead of like going to a physical store. Now on the internet, you would see all the titles that were available, and then you would click on the one you would want. You order it. It would come to you by the mail, since now they were DVDs instead of these big VHS tapes. You could send it through the mail, and it'd be, you could use that 25-cent posting or whatever the stamp was at the time. You could use that postage to just send it cheaply to your customers. And so they would send, like your thing to your mail. You would watch the DVD, and I guess the cool part of it was that you didn't have to return it at any point. Or you would have to keep paying for the service, obviously, but you would like a monthly fee for the service, but you would never have to pay late fees. If you wanted a different movie, then you would have to return that movie first, so then you could get the next movie that you want. So that's kind of like what the initial Netflix model was back in 1997. This actually became a hit. People really enjoyed this model over the traditional Blockbuster model, and this started the descent of Blockbuster. And so by 2007, around 10 years later, they saw YouTube's success, right, in 2006, and seeing that bandwidth and streaming was the future, better internet connections, more and more data could be streamed, right? So like back in 1997, we were using 56K fucking modems, right? Like the that kind of shit. Actually, it's 97. I think we might have been using fucking 14.4 at the time. I don't think 56K was until I was in high school. So yeah, like we were working with some slow shit back in the day. But by 2007, we were like, oh, we can actually like see streaming videos in real time. Of course, the early YouTube videos, I think they were like 144 or 240p or some shit like that. But like the point remains, like technology was going to improve more and more and more. And so initially they started their own streaming service, but it was kind of like an experiment. What they did was they put up 1,000 titles. They licensed these titles, I guess, from the studios or whatever. They weren't like crazy good titles. They were kind of like, they were probably like old content the studios didn't really even care about or didn't even think was going to make money on the open market anyway. And so they were willing to be like, yeah, you could use this, like just pay us X amount of dollars. So they get this catalog of 1,000 titles. And so this was kind of like the initial idea was to use this to leapfrog the DVD model and show the streaming model. So now instead of even having to mail and get your movie and put in your DVD player and take it out and then return it to get the next movie, now if you wanted to watch movies back to back and back, you could just be like, oh, click on that one, oh, click on that one, oh, click on that one, and so that was kind of like the idea. Like if they could show that there was like a proof of concept to these studios, they could convince them to license their shows that they could be able to rent to their customers. And so that was kind of the idea of what they were experimenting with. But then by 2011, their DVDs revenues were starting to peak. people started to kind of like not, I guess, rent as much DVDs anymore. I guess people, like I said before, the YouTube stuff, everything was taking off, and people were paying more and more attention to social media, Instagram, and all that other stuff. So DVD revenues started to fall down for Netflix. But over that time, they had collected 4 years of data, right? Like all those 1,000 titles I talked about. People were actually, I didn't, I was actually a Netflix subscriber back in the day, but I was like, this is fucking bullshit, like content. I don't want to fucking watch this garbage. But there were people who did, like there are probably, people who are bored on a Saturday night and wanted to watch just anything. And you're like, oh, let's see what's on this fucking streaming thing. People, curious people, I'm sure too, and just watching whatever. But then they noticed that they were tracking every play, they were tracking every pause, genre preference. They were doing basically data analysis on what people were watching and why. And they found that there was this show called The House of Cards on the BBC, which was like a mini series that was very popular in that was going on. Also, a lot of these viewers that they're popular, the same viewers that viewed House of Cards miniseries, they also liked a lot of David Fincher content and Kevin Spacey content. And then finally, they also had data that suggested that fans of the show from The West Wing also were fans of the original show House of Cards. So it was all these people who were watching, political content and had watched this previous show in the past. I think the House of Cards, the original one, was like in the 1990s or something like that. And then, people who watched, West Wing, dry political drama by Aaron Sorkin, were interested in that. And so it's just kind of like, oh, they'll probably be interested in House of Cards if we made it with Kevin Spacey and directed by David Fincher. And so this was going on when because like the reason all this analysis was going on was because at the time there was a House of Cards project that was being pitched to all the major studios, and they wanted to sell their show to a studio, and so it was a very popular project, and different people were auctioning, or different people were bidding, like to get this project. And so by analyzing their own data, Netflix found that this project was gonna fucking make, probably do really well on their platform, considering their audience. And so they took a gamble, and they said, we will outbid everyone by 2x. I think like the bids were like around 50 million. They said like, we'll pay $100 million. We'll give you a 2-season green light, and we will give you total creative freedom to the producers, like even more so than like the HBO Sopranos stuff. Like this was totally unheard of, right? Like in Hollywood, like there's Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos. I think they were thinking like tech people, right? They're thinking like, we have the data. We know this is going to do well. So we just have to fucking get this thing no matter what. Like we don't care if they want to make a special change or whatever, blah, 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 whatever. Like we don't care about like the content at all. These are tech people. So they were like, we wouldn't even want to make notes. We don't have any notes. We're not creatives. We're just trying to get we're trying to experiment here. We're trying to get like good content. So House of Cards came out in 2013. It was a smash success. It snagged 3 Emmy nomination and a win, which is pretty good result for a place that wasn't even a studio, right? It's an amazing result for any first-time show, let alone a technology company. So because Hollywood at the time, for the longest time, had been dominating by creative execs, basically became they saw themselves as, I guess, tastemakers, but they were really just propagandists who were they had total control over people watched, because like things were popular because they just put it out there and nobody had any other options to go with. So yeah, of course it's going to be just popular if you just put it out. But then so they would rely on these execs the entire time to be like, hey, what do you think is going to be popular? Well, let's try this or whatever. And instead of like this dartboard method of let's try this, now you had these tech company with actionable proof that hits can be predicted and even generated from scratch, right? Like you could actually like engineer a hit. So Hollywood's still unfazed. They're just kind of like, all right, that's cute. You got your one hit, you got your one success, but you know we're just gonna move on as and so because at this time I think Netflix was trying to like make deals with studios and whatnot, but they were being iced out entirely. And so they decided, okay, let's just go ham on this. We just need to make more and more content. And so they had a big bag of Silicon Valley venture capital cash. You know, they're spending like something like, I feel like it was like around $10 billion a year by the end of the 2010s. And back then, people were like, I mean, studios were like, what the fuck is going on? Because their production budgets probably like a fraction of that. They were like, this is crazy. What are you guys doing? Like, this is like insane. You guys are just like, you guys are going to just spend yourself out of the business, or so they thought. And so finally, I think they also partnered with Marvel. I think they partnered with Marvel. I guess that was more of an experiment with Marvel. You know, the Jessica Jones, the Punisher, the Daredevil series, and the Iron Fist thing. They were the more kind of like the New York City ground level superheroes. You know, the ones that aren't, you know, facing cosmic threats, but the ones that are in your neighborhoods, the friendly neighborhood superheroes. That's kind of like the superheroes that were on the early days of Netflix. And then finally, they tried big concept ideas like Stranger Things. You know, they would give, like, Stranger Things was, you know, I think it was very popular because it did things. It's hard to say. It's hard to explain. But basically, I think like they were able to succeed because for a while, I think censorship ultimately does stifle creativity. And I think like once places become more and more successful, like economically and financially, they don't want to rock the boat. They want to keep the profits going as they are. So they ossify into these like, oh no, don't do that. We need to just keep the train going. So they don't take as many risks, right? But then Stranger Things was like, you know, another kind of like crazy risk. I think there was BoJack Horseman. It's one of my favorite shows actually. That was kind of like critical of Hollywood. That became a smaller kind of hit, but it was like more of like a critical darling among the Hollywood people. And so. Yeah, after pumping all that money in 2018, they create their own studio in Albuquerque for their own production stuff, to lower costs, because before that they would have to rent studio space and all that stuff. Smaller cable networks like AMC, they started to license their shows to Netflix because they don't have like a popular streaming service, because, you know, all of that is now to the big studios. So they need to sell their content now on Netflix, right? Like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. These big properties now live on Netflix instead of like a TV station, because nobody watches TV anymore. And so now Netflix, I think their revenue is around $39 billion a year. Maybe that's profit even. I have to double check that. But they're making a shit ton of money, right? You know, like I said before, like even the box office revenues, that's not profit, right? That's a lot of that is going to marketing budgets and film budgets and paying off people. A lot of that's not profit. So then Amazon also around this time, they see Netflix's success, Netflix seeing YouTube success, Amazon seeing Netflix success, but they have somewhat of a different directive, right? Amazon is not trying to be this major player in the Hollywood business just to be a major player in the Hollywood business. They want influence because, like, hey, if they can make an addictive video service that you're watching over Netflix and all these other streaming sites, or at least getting some of that into, you're also like tying it into your Amazon Prime membership, so you're kind of like making that service a little bit more sticky, and you're making it like, oh, do I want to get rid of Prime this year? I don't have to wait that long for my pack. I can wait a little bit for my packages, but it's like, oh wait, but I'll lose my Prime Video and I can't watch those shows that I've been thinking about, or those cool shows that I've been hearing about, like Fallout. So that's kind of like why they initially, I think, went into the movie industry. So in they initially, I think they started to try for a more movie centric strategy rather than a TV show. I think they tried to fund some movie for the Hollywood Awards market stuff, but then they started to make shows as well. I think Man in the High Castle was their first big success in 2015, and then The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in 2018. And then in 2022, Amazon bought MGM, one of the former big studios, for $8.45 billion. So, yeah, that's like a rounding error to Amazon. This is a $2 trillion company, right? So they're just buying MGM outright for $8 billion. So instantly they have all of their library and their content to Prime Video, making it, they now have a lot of legacy content too. That Bond series I talked about, that's all on Amazon now. I didn't know that. I should rewatch some of those movies. They're pretty good, even though I know they're propaganda. MI6. So Prime Video for Amazon now kind of like generates approximately $12 to $15 billion a year. I don't know how they calculate that, because like, how do they split it out from the revenue? I guess it's probably like some sort of algorithm that watch time and whatever, and blah blah blah. So according to that, their metrics, they make around $12 to $15 billion a year. Apple itself, Apple started its own streaming service in 2019. They started way later, but their directives are even more different. I think Apple initially, their company revolved around the iPhone for the longest time, since the iPhone came out. And then, after the iPad came out, now it's like about like keeping the ecosystem together. Like if you buy an iPhone, you buy an iPad, now you have to buy a Mac, and kind of like, trying to keep you in that Apple ecosystem is Apple's biggest sort of like business play. And so for that, they probably want you to keep using Apple products. And so you can only see Apple TV on Apple products, actually. And so Apple TV, they kind of generate $2 to $3 billion in revenue. But I think they still are losing money. But Apple's bigger than Amazon even. I think they have like a 200 or $300 billion cash hoard. So yeah, while like people will be like, holy shit, like Apple spent $500 million on that. Oh man, that sucked. Like, well, what do they think they're doing? But like, Apple's like, whatever, $500 million. I eat that for fucking breakfast. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think like the Hollywood people, they don't understand how technology people think about economics. They're, the traditional VC model is basically the disruption tech 2.0 model. What it is basically undercut the traditional market by so much that everyone starts to use your shit. Once you take over their fucking market, then you start jacking up the prices, since now you have the monopoly. And so like Hollywood people, they execs and people, for the longest time, they didn't understand this concept. And so they were like, wait, they're spending all this money. They're going to go out of business. It's just like, no, you don't know what's going on here. And so they're probably still losing money, but they have an endless supply of cash, and they are starting to make some strides into the industry as well, because, you know, even though they are losing money, that's they're generating revenue, and that's money that they're taking from Hollywood, right? Or that's attention that they're grabbing from Hollywood. And so this streaming service, Tim Cook says he wants to entertain, inform, and inspire with premium ad-free content. So it is kind of like, I guess Apple's trying to brand their content as this like premium, but like very art kind of like content, and sort of like they're kind of going into more of that prestige sort of market in terms of their content, or they've been trying to. That's a little bit more difficult because prestige stuff is kind of like locked up with the studios. But, you know, like money talks, and they can just throw money at big directors and be like, hey, you want to come over and do your project here? And like that Hollywood can't afford anymore because they're broke. It's like, yeah, come over to Apple, make your Godfather 4, you know? So then these tech companies, they are going to circle the waters, you know, they like, you know, in 2022, like I said, Amazon just bought up MGM, just gobbled them up. And Sony, for example, you know, Sony is in dire straits. All the Spider-Man fucking films in the past few years, they have been so bad, such terrible flops. Like, I think like Sony is trying to jump ship right now. And so, not only that, I think Bob Iger as well is starting to feel the heat. And I'll talk about that a little later, actually. Because like, when you think about it, like I said before, like if a studio is going to bulk at like your project that's like $200-300 million, let's say you're fucking Scorsese, or let's say you're Scorsese, and you're just kind of like, I want to make a fucking $300 million film, you know, with this concept or blah blah blah, and then like all these studios be like, no, that's terrible idea. But then if you were like Apple, I want to do it here, you're like, yeah, why not? Let's try it. You know, it's just kind of like they can just afford to do that. Like the magnitude of the money that they have, they were a $3 trillion company. They literally have $10,300 million budgets. So it's just kind of like, what are you talking about? So, okay. And then now finally, you know, because Hollywood slept at the wheel, instead of like doing what they did with TV, with the internet, they fell behind. You know, they tried to get their act together in the late 2010s by starting their own streaming services, but that's kind of been a debacle as well. But let's go into like why also politically Hollywood kind of like declined. And so you might ask, Doug, you know, like if the tech companies simply scoop up the studio's IP and use the same established, you know, content creators as before, won't it kind of be the same, since like they won't have the same propaganda function, but the cartel will remain the same, right? Like so we'll see kind of like the same sort of, and Hollywood will still remain, but it'll just like be under the tech overload. Tech people will become Hollywood, right? And while that is true, tech people probably will become Hollywood in the next 5 to 10 years. Hollywood itself is still going to change, because they took a terrible risk, in my opinion, in going way too political in the past 10, 15 years, and they cannot pivot. And so let's talk about that. So as mentioned, so let's start the business side from the 1970s. So this is kind of like when I talked about the big blockbusters at the Vietnam War, and how people started to go more into that blockbuster format, right? Like that big product that was a guaranteed hit. Like you can, you know, so once they made that guaranteed hit, the Hollywood economy itself started to look like a planned economy, right? Like where they would plan hits, plan whatever. Like when you see like Marvel's Phase 4, 5, and 6, they're literally trying to plan 7 years of content in advance for you to watch. That has been a disaster, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, so that's kind of like how Hollywood started to become structured through this blockbuster system. Like they started to realize, hey, we just need to create bigger projects. We got it became like kind of like an arms race between these different studios. Like we just need to top that project, and we'll get the winner or they would try to like, you know, book big projects in different weekends so they wouldn't compete with each other. And so in the 1970s, there was a new agency called CAA, which is now the top agency in Hollywood, or the most powerful agency in Hollywood. And this was started in the 1970s by some former William and Morris agency. I think it's William Morris and Endeavor now. But back then, that was the top agency at the time. But then some of those agents, kind of like Jerry Maguire style, like left the agency and were like, we want to make a new agency. We want to do things a lot differently. We want to kind of change the game a bit here. And so once they saw this Blockbuster stuff going on and the breakdown of the studio system, they were like, hey, what if we became that studio system? So they pioneered the practice of packaging, where instead of the studio putting, you know, their director, you know, in the studio systems, right? Remember, it was like they hired their own in-house directors, in-house actors, in-house producers to make a project, right? For CAA, they were like, hey, we got A-lister talent that we're representing. We got, you know, A-lister writers that we're representing. We have A-lister producers that we're representing. Why don't we start trying to come up with projects where they can all kind of like work together, and we could sell that to studios as a package deal, while we also kind of get a packaging fee as well. And so they introduced this new type of system so that not only could they profit off these blockbusters by having the A-listers that represented, they would also profit by selling these big blockbuster projects themselves to these studios by saying, hey, we'll get a, you know, producer's fee or cut or whatever, we'll you know, like for bringing you this project and packaging it. And so this started to re-corporatize Hollywood's creativity. Remember when I said, like, you know, the studio system before, you know, and Edison system before, because it was so corporatized, it like started to, you know, make, you know, movies that were all the same, and it stifled creativity. Same sort of process started to go on here, where, you know, instead of like taking chances on, you know, smaller projects, blah, 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 now it was just focusing on these big projects to make safer bets. Soon after, like Star Wars in 11 million, it was, it says $57.5 million adjusted for inflation. And that was unheard of in 1977. But soon afterwards, movie budgets kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And now, I'm sure you know, there have been, like, you know, if you see James Cameron's Avatar, what is that, like $400 million budgets now? It's just kind of like insane. Big event movies meant more marketing, more planning, and most of all, you needed A-lister talent, right? You couldn't put your B team on your big investment, because otherwise that would be a huge risk, right? You want to have all your ducks in a row to make sure this is not a flop. So that means you're going to use established talent. You're going to, you know, like make all this marketing, all this planning to create these projects. So then the CAA, that agency, by the 1990s, in 20 years time, I think, they became the #1 agency in America, and after that they pivoted into other stuff, like that's probably what Hollywood should have done. They pivoted into music. They pivoted into sports. They did. I mean, I guess Hollywood does control music, but they did sports. They did video games. They did Now they did influencers, and apparently now even President Joe Biden is represented by CAA. I guess ostensibly for fucking stupid $500,000 speaking engagements at Goldman Sachs or whatever that Obama does. Same kind of shit. So CAA itself is worth $7 billion, which actually kind of rivals some of the smaller studios in Hollywood, like Lionsgate or, like MGM, right? It was just sold for $8.45 billion. So CAA itself has become as powerful as a small level studio. The packaging had taken over Hollywood by the 1990s. The verticals were ossified, and independent studios had to look for alternative sources of financing to take big swings. And when they were successful, they would actually be just bought up by the big studios, right? I think Miramax, for example, was bought by Disney in 1993. That was Harvey Weinstein's company. They made a lot of independent films. But then, like, once they became successful enough, like, the studios were like, oh, well, we'll just buy you and get your IP and you get your creative talent or whatever. So it was getting harder and harder to break into the industry because literally they were just buying up people who were successful and just like churning them into the system over and over again. By the 2000s, it was clear that the average event movie was kind of like basically like the big spectacle that, you were kind of like, hey, like that's fun. The summer film thing, whatever, but you're just kind of like afterwards, you're like, oh, that was, it was entertaining. It's just like an entertaining ride, right? That they would make. And that's kind of like what Scorsese says about Marvel films. And it's kind of true. It's like, it's not really like a movie where you're thinking and you're like, you're being given some sort of like deep sort of debate or question or whatever, or philosophical idea. It's more just kind of like, hey, cool shit happening and Infinity Stones and like blah 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 blah. And so in 2000, this started an arms race, right? In 2000, for example, MI2, which was Mission Impossible 2, was the biggest grossing film in 2000, and that had a budget of $120 million. In 2009, Avatar, which was the highest grossing film of the 2000s, had a budget of $237 million, sorry. And that was almost double what was spent on MI2, right? Just 9 years prior. So already you're seeing like kind of like insane growth in the amount of money being spent on these films, on these big budget films. It started to become like this arms race, like I said. And because the budgets kept getting bigger and bigger, the risk for flop grew more and more and more, right? Because if you spend all this money, you better make sure it doesn't fucking flop, right? So because of that, now marketing budgets ballooned significantly. Like previously, you would spend a little bit of money on marketing, but like, people back then still, like, for example, Star Wars, that succeeded a lot on word of mouth marketing. But by the 2000s, you couldn't fuck around with that. You couldn't say like, oh, it'll be popular word of mouth. No, you had to like, blast it in front of like people's fucking face, like Super Bowl, like spots, whatever. The big movie, this is coming out in, what is it? Like a fucking Memorial Day weekend. You blast it out in Super Bowl weekend, which is 3 months before that. Be like, this is the teaser to this cool movie that you have to watch. And so like marketing budgets became so large that I think like it's like sometimes it could be 2 to 3 times the actual budget of the movie itself. And so not only that, they're, like I said before, they're losing all this fucking attention to the internet and all this stuff. So they got to blast out even more marketing because like people aren't watching movies anymore. You got to feel like, hey, it's exciting. Come back. So they're just like spending so much money on these big big projects, because that's how the business has started to like kind of move into. And so after that, they would use more and more proven talent, like I said before. This destroyed natural development for verticals, as people, now it became harder for you to start out as an actor, like a guest star or whatever, and move your way up. Sometimes that would be how some people would move their way up. They would get a spot in a movie, like a small role, and then they would impress people, and then they would kind of like move up or whatever. But nowadays, for example, even like the guest star roles of TV shows are being taken by like not A-listers, but like pretty well-known actors who are already kind of like in the business. Like you cannot even get like a guest star role if you're just starting out. You're getting a co-star or like background, and to move up to the next level, you need to like make your own shit, like I tried, or you got to do something crazy, because like you cannot break in the traditional way anymore. So this led to a reduction in actual talent, because like when you have the same talent, working in the industry the entire time, now you don't have like newer talent that you can bring up, next man up, right? That's why you see like Awkwafina in every single fucking film with an Asian person in it. It's just like, oh, Awkwafina's big, let's just throw her in it. Or fucking Pedro Pascal, right? Like everyone's tired of seeing Pedro Pascal. Like, oh, let's throw him in here and here and here and here. And that's why you see Zendaya and everything. Or all these it's becoming more and more ossified, so that they literally cannot, they can't cast anyone outside of that like circle, because it would be too risky, because like what if people are like, there's so many different shows to choose from. They're going to be like, oh, well, that doesn't have that show seems interesting, but it doesn't have the actor that I want in it. So it's just kind of like, over time, no one is like developing the lower ranks of it. So over time, the acting talent becomes worse and worse and worse. And then finally, there's nepotism, right? There's rampant nepotism, where there are some actors, not going to name any names, but I might show some stuff on the screen right now, that are not talented at all, and have gotten definitely in because of their relationship with their parents. And so this kind of like, overall ruins the product. I might sound like sour grapes, because like I failed to make it in the industry, and probably a little bit of that is true. But like, yeah, like not only is it stupid and unfair for nepotism to exist in Hollywood, but it also ruins the product over time. You are just like, people don't want to see bad shit. Like, get that out of my face. Especially like when we're paying more and more dollars to watch it now, and so this is kind of like ruining the overall product. There's less creativity. There's less talent. It's just become this circle jerk of the top Hollywood stars, just yeah, a fucking multi-year long circle jerk. So because, like I said, because they pursued a more planned economic model, Hollywood relies on the production of franchises and sequels, right? So they start to try to copy the Star Wars model. They made franchises with like Harry Potter. They made Lord of the Rings. They made Pirates of the Caribbean. They made even the Star Wars prequels themselves. They also remade franchises like the Ghostbusters, or they tried to remake or reboot some franchises like Spider-Man was rebooted literally 3 times since, or 2 times rather, since the 2000s. And so they continually had to generate stuff from previous IP, because they were already, franchises existed before in the past, right? Like Ghostbusters and Back to the Future, these old franchises, they existed in the past. But because like people were still used to new ideas, and the movie industry wasn't like as ossified yet, people would still like take a chance on a Ghostbusters or whatever. But now it's just kind of like, if you want to take a chance on something, it's just like not even economically feasible to do so. So that's why studios have gone to remakes and franchises all this time, because those are already proven products that have an established audience base. So that means you can reduce the amount of money you spend on marketing, because now you already know that people, how to target these people, and how to get them to come to the theater, because you're like, oh, this is going to show X element of the story that you haven't heard about or whatever. And that was kind of like the idea behind continually going into franchises. So ultimately, this is where I talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So this was the most successful franchise in movie history, as most of you know. It starts off with a clear Zionist and military-industrial complex propaganda, with Iron Man, being literally based off of Elon Musk as well. I don't know if you know this, but RDJ went to SpaceX in 2007, I think, to research for the role, because he wanted to visit SpaceX and I guess like a shadow Elon for a day and see what was going on. Elon, I think he showed up in the second film as a cameo. Maybe I'll have that up. But basically, the film is super military propaganda. I mean, you have Jericho missile, like there were Muslim terrorists that were, and it was a lot of might is right ethos going on. And it was just like, it was so, I mean, like looking back at it now, I mean, back in 2008, it wasn't as obvious, but looking back at it now, I'm like, this is fucking like insane Zionist propaganda here. And so after the success of Iron Man, actually the Incredible Hulk with Ed Norton, that was the initial film, but that didn't do that well. But Iron Man was their first big hit. But Incredible Hulk is still canon, apparently. So then Iron Man started to prove to the studio that, oh, okay, people are excited about this stuff. So that's when they moved into other characters like Thor, Captain America, rounding out the Avengers. So by Phase 3, which was in 2016, I believe, that started in 2016, they had the release of Captain America 3, Civil War, some other movie, I think. But basically, they almost guaranteed that if you made a Marvel film, you would just make money. You would just make shit tons of money. By 2016, they had a proven model. So the success of the MCU was based on a variety of factors. First one of which was that, superheroes have been around, or superhero films have been around for a while. There was Christopher Reeves in 1978 in the first Superman film, and obviously I think there was Michael Keaton in 1989, I believe, in the Batman films, and obviously the Christopher Nolan Batman films in 2005, starting in Batman Begins, and so there were superhero movies before. But the technology and CGI at that point had improved to the point where they could create believable X-Men and Spider-Man films, because those were a little bit harder to make believable back in the day. Because, I mean, if you know the X-Men and Spider-Man, you'll understand why. It was very hard to create something that looked like Spider-Man in a live action film until 2002, when Avi Arad and what's his name again? Tobey Maguire. They made Spider-Man, and the success of these movies, the X-Men and Spider-Man films, were pretty much showed that like superheroes were kind of very popular, and they weren't just like nerd shit. And so, although they didn't have the licensing to make their most popular content, Marvel had licensed them already to Fox and Sony, And I think Universal had Fantastic Four. Fox had X-Men, Sony had Spider-Man. Universal, I think, had Fantastic Four. But Marvel Comics, they had sold all that off. But so then when Disney bought Marvel, or I don't know if they bought Marvel just yet, but Disney was working with Marvel Studios. They were like, hey, let's make... actually, I don't know if did Disney buy Marvel Studios after? I think they might have. I'm not sure exactly. Actually, I might have to check that. But they had to use their third most popular team, because X-Men in the Marvel, I guess, like comic stuff, it was always X-Men, and then there was Fantastic Four, and then like distant third was Avengers. Like I didn't really like know anything about the Avengers myself, and I kind of like collected Marvel cards and all that stuff. So they used their third most popular team, but still had a little cachet. They had Captain America, which was, somewhat popular in the 1930s. And, people knew who these characters were. It wasn't like they were out of nowhere. So these characters were used to kind of like launch the MCU. And so then they also had an executive producer who understood the content. From the fan, especially from like the fans' perspective, but also like holistically, like overarching, like how the Marvel kind of universe even worked. And so because of that, he could design storylines that carried over long arcs, like similar to what I was talking about, the TV shows that were going on in the Sopranos and the Golden Age of television. Now they created movies that would not just be a self-contained plot of one movie. Now it'd be a movie that would span, or storyline that would span all these different movies for a saga. By 2012, they already knew that Thanos was going to be this big thing that they were going to lead up. They didn't have the whole entire story lined up or designed out yet. I think that was by 2015. They kind of like knew that all that stuff, or worked all that stuff out. But by 2012, they already had that, post-credits teaser of Thanos, right? So they already knew where they were going 6 years in advance, because that Infinity War was 2018, and 2012 they have that post-credit scene. So, and that's the last thing that they added, the post-credit scene, because as you all know, the post-credit scene is the thing at the end of a Marvel film that kind of teases what's going to happen in the future. And it seems like a minor addition at the time, and most of you might not even realize that it was an addition, because you might be too young to remember. But this was kind of like most of the times post-credit scenes were usually just bloopers and whatever, but this is kind of like a undeniable impact, because what happened was these post-credit scene would make all the fucking nerds like nerd the fuck out on Reddit and all these boards, be like, oh, what's gonna happen? Oh, I think this is gonna happen. Oh, well, I read this comic and that's probably gonna happen. Like all this speculating was going on, that like organically, that was like the fucking organic word of mouth that was being created through these end credit scenes. And so the feeling that was being made was that the movie was not just a one-off, that this was a beginning of adventure that you had to watch, like the Sopranos show I was talking about. You had to watch all of them in sequence to understand. So then Disney had already acquired Pixar, and then they also acquired Lucasfilm in 2012 for $4 billion. And this is actually how much the sequels generated in revenue. I think there was $2 billion for The Force Awakens. Then it dropped off a lot for The Last Jedi and Skywalker. But they did make $4 billion, and they're probably still continuing to profit off Star Wars itself, though probably not more so in recent times. And so WB tried their own DC Universe stuff, but they never were really successful in getting off the ground. And then, like I said before, Sony and Amy Pascal ruined nearly every single Spider-Man project that they touched. except for the Into the Spider-Verse series. Somehow they managed to not fuck that up. I think that's more doing because of Lord and Miller. I really love those creators. They're great. But they're kind of like the ones that are running the show with Spider-Verse. So that's why that one doesn't suck, but the rest of them kind of sucks, and it's clear that Kevin Feige hates his life when he has to deal with Amy Pascal. So by 2012, like, by 2015 and, by 2016, 15, 16, Black Panther and everything's coming out, it's pretty clear that like Disney has almost like total IP supremacy of the industry itself, among the major studios. Disney Plus had a massive success in the first year. A lot of that had to do with COVID, because you had captive audiences now that needed stuff to watch. So everyone signed up for Disney Plus at the time, which was, I think it was like $7. And we were like, yeah, well, sure, I'm bored at home, just pay for the shit. So then politically now, because they had all this success because they had all this control over what you saw, like every Disney movie, every Star Wars movie, every Marvel movie, every Pixar movie is shooting into your eyeballs. Now, like, Disney almost had total control over the entertainment that most of America was watching. So they used that to sort of try to influence people politically with their content. For the first 3 phases, they didn't start off overly political. Most of the main cast was white male, as we all know. Most of the Avengers were white men, except for obviously Scarlett Johansson, who is a white woman. And so they weren't super woke in the first 3. But by phase 3, they start to introduce a little bit of woke stuff in there. But because Marvel is so popular, right? It doesn't even phase people. People are like, oh yeah, I love woke. That's cool. Captain Marvel, girl power, right? Girl power, right? That's 2017. That made $1 billion. I think Captain Marvel made $1 billion. It's hard to believe now. Because I think Captain Marvel 2 like bombed with like 200 million or something like that. It's hard to believe now, but Captain Marvel actually made $1 billion. And 2016, obviously, Black Panther, I think it cleared $1 billion, maybe more. And that actually became emblematic of the BLM movement, which, again, as I said before, is ironic because it is basically a propaganda film against the Black Panthers. But anyway, they're just hitting all these records. Endgame, I think it surpassed Avatar until like Avatar re-released their thing right before Avatar 2, and then they re-surpassed it or whatever, something stupid like that. But the Endgame does hit fucking all the records, and it makes $2.8 billion for a film. Insane numbers. Robert Downey Jr. is building his own Iron Man suit from the proceeds that he's making. All this fucking money that Disney is making off Marvel is just insane at this point. So it seems like Disney is like invincible at this point. So it's like, how did everything fucking blow up, right? How did we're on phase 6 now, and it's very apparent that Disney is on its way down. So let's start with the obvious. It was COVID-19, right? While Disney did enjoy initial boost and their streaming service took off because of it, their storylines, when they started phase 4, they had storylines that were in like their TV shows. They started to make 6 new TV shows pretty much 5 to 6 new TV shows every year to tie into the movie content. But then because movies weren't being shown in 2021, like the timing was way off. Like now you had like, well, first of all, even Black Widow, I guess they were somewhat saved because Black Widow was not really even supposed to be part of phase 4. It was more kind of like it was more of kind of like a thank you to Scarlett Johansson for doing all her stuff and not having her own film, and like, oh, okay, this is your film now. No, I didn't even watch it. I don't care about that film. But then that also gave Marvel a legal headache because or Disney a legal headache because Disney Plus decided to put Black Widow instead of in theaters because you couldn't put anything in theaters. They decided to release it on Disney Plus. That caused another sort of snafu because now, you know, you have Scarlett Johansson making a very public lawsuit against you. And so Disney kind of like struggled a little bit because their timing was off too. Because like now you watched, for example, WandaVision. I think it was like in 2020 or like the beginning of 2021 or something like that. And then it would be like a year later or so where you would watch Doctor Strange. But then like those things were supposed to be lined up like right back to back together, so you'd be like excited about both things. And so that initial impact of like that you know, that end credits thing of like being excited for something and then getting that fix like a few months later as planned, you know, that sort of build up is sort of disrupted because now, you know, you would either have things coming in too early or too late, and it would just like confuse people, and people would be like, wait, what's going on? So then, like I said before, Disney was just producing a shit ton of stuff. They were like like the kinetoscope people in the past, like the studio system in the past, like these blockbusters now in the current. They went through the same golden goose story, you know, like you never fucking wanna, or I guess rather it's the opposite of the golden goose, because the golden goose is keep laying your eggs and never mind. That analogy doesn't work. But the point is, you basically had a situation where they were just making shows and expecting them all to be successful because they were part of the Marvel franchise. And, you know, because in phase 3, that was pretty much true. But then, like, what they didn't understand was that this was a totally new saga that they were starting from the beginning, right? So then phase 3, or phase 1, 2, 3, they were all part of a saga, the Infinity Saga, right? So they were all stuck together. But when you're starting a new saga, I guess, like, this was the multiverse saga. I don't even know what it is now because, like, they're changing it all the time. But if you want to, you have to start by making high quality things to get your audience invested in these characters. So by phase 6, they will be on board and watching everything, right? But they started out like just throwing slop at us, you know, like, you know, by these first time directors and first time producers and writers or whatever. Because they just thought like if it was Marvel, people were just going to watch it. And since, you know, it's Disney Plus, you could just watch all of them. And like you would be happy to. Right, you would be happy to watch all this stuff because it's Marvel, right? Like it has to be good, right? But then the reason why they were doing this is because, you know, they got rid of the old Avengers, because like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, more Robert Downey Jr. because he was the most expensive line item. I think he made around $500 million. It's rumored that he made like $500 million on the Marvel franchise, and he's gonna probably make another $100 million with Doomsday or fucking whatever. Probably make $200 million. I don't even fucking know. He's just like, what is money to him anymore? You know. Anyway, so they thought woke was in, right? Everyone was watching Black Panther. Everyone was watching Captain Marvel or whatever. And they had that fucking cheesy ass fucking scene at the end of the end game. And everyone, you know, $2.8 billion for end game, like, right? So they're like, oh, woke is in. People want to see diverse characters. We just have to throw diverse characters at them, even if they have no fucking talent, even if they're not proven at all, even if they're just like first time directors or writers or whatever. So they just like threw woke slop that nobody wanted to watch. You know, like they just ended up being kind of like soapboxes for liberals. They were less about these cool superhero stories that we all wanted to watch and and enjoy, and they were just like preachy fucking like like church sermons, at the fucking church. Like, I felt like I was going to fucking church again, listening to a boring Sunday school teacher tell me, the story of a parable of the lost coin for the 10th time or some shit. It's just like, this was terrible. Like, it wasn't just mediocre. These shows were like fucking terrible. And unfortunately, especially on the writing side, like, you can throw DEI talent, like maybe actors and maybe directors even, but like, for writing is the fucking key, and that cannot be fucked up. And because of the ossification I was talking about before, most of the good writers in Hollywood were still white men. This is not something you can just pick up and just be like good at instantly just because you're black or just because you're a woman. This is like something that you have to be at a craft for and working at for years and years before you are like at the top level. I have some friends who are kind of like in that range, and it is fucking tough to, even if you have that talent, it's tough to break in. And so like, you had all these fucking DEI talent who didn't have any of that shit, and so they were throwing up this fucking slop that was terrible, and so it was unclear as to like, and not only that, you had all these fucking shows, and it was very unclear as to which ones you needed to watch to understand what was going on and which ones you could kind of skip. And so personally, I have not watched any of this shit because like, I'm not even fucking interested. But like even my friends who have been still watching it stuff, they started to drop off in the past couple years. I remember somebody who had watched every opening weekend of a Marvel film for the past, until 2022 or so. And then he said it was like, oh, I watched it on the third weekend. Then it was like, oh, I watched it on the fourth weekend. Oh, I just caught it on Disney Plus. It became like more and more like apparent that people did not give a shit anymore about this fucking slop. And so finally, the last thing is that the zeitgeist changed, right? I'm sure a lot of you people are already aware that woke is no longer in or popular. I think during the Biden administration, they overplayed their woke hand, and people just got fucking sick and tired of hearing about how oppressed or oppressive they were being, I guess, or apparently, or whatever, or not, or how anti-black, or how misogynist, or how anti-trans, or it just became like a fucking tiring bullshit nonsense. Nobody wanted to fucking watch that anymore. Nobody wanted to fucking see that anymore. And so, because like, Marvel, especially with Marvel, right? Because like, Marvel's primary audience is still younger males, like comic book readers, right? Like people who fucking read comics. And even Captain Marvel, for example, that was still 51% male audience. Like, women talk about feminism and the WNBA and all this shit all the time. But at the end of the day, when you go into men's spaces with your feminism, you don't even fucking buy that shit yourselves. You don't care about that stuff. So it's just kind of like, why are you being so insistent on being in a thing that you don't even fucking buy? Anyway, sorry about that. So yeah, like I said before, these younger males, they're sick of being proselytized to and saying that they're white male and they're racist and they're misogynist all the time. So like, why would I, if I was a white guy and I was watching this stuff, I'd be like, yeah, I don't want to fucking watch this shit. Like, yeah, it makes total sense. And so, they and then in response, Disney and Marvel, they would have their fucking woke, journalists try to be like, oh, you don't want to watch it because you're racist or whatever. And it's just kind of like, no, I don't want to watch it because it's fucking terrible. And I want to be entertained. I don't want to spend money to go to church. If I want to go to actual church, I can go there for free. I don't need to fucking pay money to go to church. Um, and finally, obviously with the October 7th in 2023, um, the big Captain America 4 release had to be changed because it featured a Israeli superhero. They changed her into just kind of like a diplomat, I think, in the movie. I haven't watched it myself, but the movie still bombed because it's probably terrible. I think it was It was just mediocre, from what I heard. I think some people told me it's just mediocre. It was like not terrible, but just mediocre. But yeah, that was a huge investment, and it had a lot of reshoots because they had to work around that Israeli superhero storyline. No longer could they have like a Tony Stark lethally eliminating terrorists in their cave with Jericho missiles, right? You couldn't post that shit and be woke anymore. So then by 2023, it was so obvious that woke was out. DEI execs were fired across all the major studios. And while Disney's revenue was still increasing year on year, the reason for that was because they were pretty much like increasing their revenue from Disney Plus every year by jacking up prices. Like, remember I said it was like $7 a month for, all access, right? So over time that became more and more money. I think it's like $18 now for the same access. So it's more than 2x the price like 5 years later for the same service. And you get more fucking slop, right? And people have already watched most of this slop. Like I think my sister, for example, I think she only watched or subscribed to Disney Plus just to watch all the Marvel films for a month, and then unsubscribed once she watched all the Marvel films, just because she had never watched any of them before. She just wanted to catch up on what was happening. So she just literally just signed up for a month to knock all of those out. And so they even so they have an $18 thing, but they introduced a premium tier with ads, right? I think it's like $11 a month, but even the premium tier or the ad tier is more than what the price was initially for the whole thing. So the only reason they're generating more and more revenue is because they're jacking up their prices on Disney Plus. And so you can't do that forever, especially like since more and more people are getting sick and tired of Disney slop. So by 2022, end of 2022, Disney was desperate. They brought back Bob Iger. He retired in 2020. And he had collected all the Infinity Stones. He had collected Pixar. He had unified ABC Studios with Disney. He had he had collected Marvel. He had collected Lucasfilm. He basically made this IP juggernaut, and he was like, "I'm good, right, guys? Like things are good here. I did my service, but like 2 years later, they were like, no, we need you back." So he's back, and Marvel quickly pivoted away from Jonathan Major, who was Kang the Conqueror. So he was supposed to be the main villain in this 4, 5, 6 multiverse saga arc, like the Thanos of this arc. So, but I think there was some sort of arrest of domestic assault. That was kind of bullshit. I think Jonathan Majors was running away from the woman who claimed he assaulted her, and still managed to get some sort of third-degree charge that Marvel used as an excuse to let him go and rehire Robert Downey Jr. as not Iron Man, but fucking Doctor Doom, Marvel's second most popular villain. And while there is an Iron Man becomes Doctor Doom storyline, and so it does somewhat make sense in the canon of Marvel Comics, it was definitely like, it screamed desperation. Like, everyone fucking knew. And like, there's rumors now that a lot of the other cast is probably going to be in the next Doomsday / Avengers films as well. And so it's just kind of like, I feel like, what Bob Iger is trying to do is like basically get one fucking big hit, like with bring it back for Doomsday, bring it back for Secret Wars or whatever the fucking, big 4 and 5 movies are. Use those numbers to be like, hey, Apple, hey, Amazon, you want to buy us? Look what we're cooking. We're still on our A game. I think he's literally trying to like boost the revenues short term so he can just sell it off to fucking Amazon and Apple and have that be his swan song of victory. I don't know. And that's just my theory. So I don't know if that's actually true, but I feel like it is. So Disney, of course, was at the end of 2019 the safest bet in Hollywood. So when the safest bet in Hollywood is struggling like this, the other studios, they're definitely fucking scrambling. Like Peacock and Universal, like that, like this I don't even know anyone who has Peacock. Let's fucking be real. Or Paramount and CBS, Paramount Plus. Like, what are you doing? I guess like HBO is somewhat okay. They literally just like wiped out every single fucking woke slop. Their new content head has just fucking slashed everything. Yeah, they have gotten off the woke train. And who else is there? Well, yeah, Sony's trying to probably sell to Netflix. I feel like their whole entire library is on Netflix now, like all that fucking Venom film slop. Yeah, so that's probably where things are going. Sony will probably go to Netflix. Disney probably wants to sell to Apple. I don't know what's going on, but Universal, I think they're still with Comcast, so that might be, they might just want to hang on to that just for their own cable networks and stuff like that. But yeah, that's probably how it's going to go. So if the safest bet in town is having in panic mode, you can be pretty confident the other studios are not faring any better. So then what happens now, right? Well, as far as Hollywood goes, it's not going to disappear overnight. Even 5-6 years ago when I was talking about this with some friends of mine in the industry, I was just kind of like, what's probably going to happen is that Hollywood turns into something like the opera or jazz, right? Like there's still old timers and some young people who appreciate it. But it's very niche. But it's more for old people, right? Or old people who still enjoyed that format, because they were used to it when they were younger, and they wanted to rewatch it, or keep going back to that stuff because it's like nostalgia, right? And so that'll probably be the same thing for film, because like these days, even now, a lot more of the audience is starting to trend older because young people just don't go to movies anymore. So they're marketing more or movie content and all this stuff. They're not being really made for the youths. They're still obviously make the kids movies because that's still kids don't care. They don't choose really what they watch. They just watch whatever slop is given to them, right? Whereas I think more the teenager / young adult market, they're kind of like tuned out completely. So then you have movies that are more kind of like, I feel like either that same like big budget Marvel slop or whatever. That's probably more for the young adult crowd. But then the movies that like, for the older crowd, those are going to be the art films and all this stuff. So you're going to still have those, right? You're going to still have that happening because, the art films, they don't cost that much to make. And you could still like get butts and seats, like Conclave, it's a pretty good film. But it's clearly not like a huge blockbuster type, like big budget film. But it was like, it was award ceremony type stuff that'll exist. But if Hollywood wants to keep remaining relevant in terms of the theater stuff, in terms of like the brick and mortar, like the live theater stuff, it's gonna have to like probably innovate I don't know what that looks like. I think Korea tried some sort of like 4DX stuff where they shoot wind in your face and like move around your seats, so you like kind of like VR movie watching or whatever. I think I tried that once during a Fast and Furious movie, and it was kind of like weird. Um, but I think like like Las Vegas Sphere, when you see like the there's like a screen that's in 360 view of your viewing area, and you're just kind of like, oh shit, that's kind of cool. So that might be a thing that people might try, or theaters might try, or some other sort of like VR moving around interactive immersive sort of technology. That's kind of like how like maybe like how they have virtual reality laser tag or something like that. Something like that will in these rooms, and something like that will probably take over the physical brick and mortar movie experience, if that is to kind of like survive in like more of like a commercially like mainstream format. Other than that, though, if that doesn't happen, like I said, it'll probably decline to an equilibrium point, just like jazz and opera have. There's an equilibrium point where it will not really decline anymore or improve anymore. It just kind of like stays in that zone. And that's kind of like what I think will happen to the business itself. As for Hollywood's hold over the zeitgeist, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. Even if the tech companies totally control Hollywood, there are just so many more options, not only for content, but for fact checking. Like you could ask ChatGPT or Grok or whatever if anything in a movie like makes sense or is based on a real story, or like you could just like figure out, like if you felt like something was off about something, you could just like ask the internet and get instant responses about something. So like even like back in the day when you watch the movie, you would just kind of have to sit in your thoughts and think about it, whatever. But now you could just like talk to everyone. Like everyone's analyzing everything that's going on, and so you can get like quick and good analysis on everything pretty easily now, because there are content creators on internet who review all these movies. There's one I really like, actually. It's called The Critical Drinker. You can check out his channel. I don't really like his politics, but his movie analysis is really good. But then yeah, so you're not gonna ever put that zeitgeist control back into the bottle, because like that just doesn't exist anymore. There's just too many options. There's just too many different things to watch. There's too many ways to like analyze what you're watching, so the propaganda effect is nullified. And so while it's clear that right now Hollywood still has pretty strong hold on like the liberal woke slop crowd, like the people who have bought into wokeism and will never probably ever let it go. They worship at the Church of Woke, and it is very apparent that they will not leave the Church of Woke ever again. So Hollywood has control over those people. But then for the rest of society, they've kind of looked like bullshit. And so I think because of that, that's sort of like a trust thing that I don't think they'll ever get back from a lot of the public. I think a lot of public will now view them with suspicion, and will view like watch a lot of stuff with a microscope. I already do, because like I've been in the industry and I've been analyzing stuff for the longest time, and even now more so politically. Like I can see everything that they're trying to do politically. But like if I'm kind of like at that level already, I feel like more and more people are going to start to go to that level as well, and wake up and see that a lot of this is fucking propaganda and bullshit. So that's where I think like it's not going to have as strong of an influence on society over time. But like I said before, it still has influence over the woke crowd. And not only that, there's just, like I said before, there's alternative entertainment content, like video game streamers. they're already talking about politics outside of the mainstream. I think there's like Destiny or Osmongold or all these like kind of like video game streamers are now talking about politics. And so they're even having more of an influence on the actual political sphere than Hollywood is, because Hollywood is just like, if you want to see liberal shit, you just go to Hollywood. And so you already know politically where they stand. But if you want any other like things, you have to go somewhere else. So they go to these other places for their kind of like entertainment and their content and like listening to kind of like different sort of political stuff. And then finally, like there was, active before Hollywood was destroyed, journalism was pretty much killed by the 2010s. Facebook and Twitter just destroyed everything, and because like the news feed and the Twitter feeds, just like, yeah, you can't compete with real-time news. And so over time, a lot of the big players started to like lose a lot of volume, lose a lot of subscribers, lose a lot of influence as well. And so that connection started to become more and more tenuous, and gave more credibility to these alternative people. I just think, yeah, like I said, the Hollywood elites, I think they overcommitted to the Democratic Party for the past 30 years. And now that the mood has shifted, they want to pivot probably right now. But some of them can't pivot because they've gone too deep. They've like I've said before, they planned out a 7-year fucking slate. That's now in its 5th year, and they're trying to right the ship, right? They overcommitted to this project that they now have to commit to like seeing through. And so I think by overcommitting politically, they've also kind of like spread themselves too thin, where now, even if they wanted to make more conservative content, now that it'll like the conservative content creators, they don't want to make stuff with Hollywood anymore because they were like, you guys are such fucking hypocrites or whatever, like fuck you. I think like Ben Shapiro, I think, or some other people were right-wingers, were making their own studios in Las Vegas or something for right-wing content, or I guess like faith-based content or stuff like that. So, and then there was the other thing too, like for the longest time, like for the past 5 to 10 years, if a product didn't succeed in Hollywood would just like fucking bash white Republicans, be like, oh, you're racist, that's why you didn't watch it. And it's just kind of like, yeah, those customers are not coming back. Like that was the same thing as like the deplorables comment in 2016. You're like, those voters are never going to vote for the Democratic Party ever again. And those people are never going to watch your fucking slop ever again. So you guys kind of shot yourself in the foot by being all overly political. And finally, regardless of wokeism or not, it was just kind of like, if you didn't adapt, you're going to decline. Hollywood did have the chances to seize the opportunity to take advantage of the internet, and they didn't. They slept at the wheel. And that's just capitalism, right? At the end of the day, technological progress, that's inevitable. And due to the cartel capitalist nature of Hollywood, they became complacent. They didn't develop new talent, like I said. They didn't even figure out how to use the internet to their advantage. And so because they were a cartel for so long, because they had guaranteed profits for so long, they were always going to be the hare that was going to lose to the tortoise. And so this is, in my opinion, this is ultimately positive. I think the decline of Hollywood is positive, a net positive for the American public because of the propaganda and because of the bullshit slop. Because, I just think that it was a huge cloud of fog that has been lifted, and more people can see truth now for what it is. However, the government's not stupid. They know what's going on, especially the Trump administration and The American government, they know Hollywood's kind of declining influence, and the Republicans, they don't care about Hollywood at all, right? Because they see it as their enemy. And so instead of now propaganda, the right wing, in my opinion, because they're closely partnering with big tech, they're switching their guns from propaganda to censorship. So the same thing with USAID, right? Like that was USAID was left-wing propaganda to maintain imperialism. Now they're taking all that USAID money and being like, "Hey, we need to bomb Yemen." you know, we need to get you guys on board with killing people. So instead of like that, we're just going to censor everyone. We're going to deport you if you are, an Asian person that is speaking up about Palestine, because fuck you. And that's kind of like where they're going. So while it is a win, and I think for the American public, I think we shouldn't, obviously as communists, we shouldn't rest on our laurels, because now they are going to the other direction. Instead of propaganda, they're going to censorship. So, I guess that is my thing about Hollywood and its decline. Stay frosty, because the CIA is always watching. I don't know. I should probably get a tagline. I should probably create a tagline. Jesus Christ, this is 3 hours, 15 minutes. Okay. Well, I guess I didn't really go that much shorter than what I was intending. There were some pauses here and there, unfortunately. I'll try to edit that out, but we'll see. Okay. All right. I'll end this now because it was way too long. All right. Thanks. See you. Bye.